Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you may be. Welcome to Honey Badger Radio. My name is Brian. I'm here with Teal Deer, friend of the channel, and we are going to be talking about a book by one Rachel Wilson called Occult Feminism. I think it's called the secret of wait, it's called the secret history of women's liberation. Yeah, Occult Feminism: The Secret History of Women's Liberation. And this is it's just kind of an interesting bit of a coincidence because Deer, you started looking into a kind of, I don't know how you would describe it, but a link between spiritualism or the occult and ideologies like feminism, right? And I wasn't really looking into that, but I was interested in different perspectives of sort of anti-feminist content, and I came across this book and then I mentioned it to you. um is that like fair to say? Is that your current ongoing project?
Yeah, it's just that feminism, intersectionality, the critical X's, the critical theories, critical studies, all of that stuff. All of that is based on the writings of Hegel, and all of his stuff is spiritual in origin. And a lot of people who talk about that stuff, they like to say, "Oh well, but it's all based on Marx, and therefore the spiritualism doesn't count." No, that's nonsense. The way Marx phrased it and a lot of the terminology that he used is Hegelian, and this stuff shares a similar origin point. There's also a lot of close links between socialism more broadly and feminism throughout its entire history. So it's not exactly a shocking thing to say that feminism has religious origins to it, has spiritual origins to it. And they happen to be the same spiritual points that you find in Gnostic traditions. This is all going back to Neoplatonism. And they're the same ones which come up through things like Hermetica.
Yeah.
And that is the stuff that leads you into spiritualism, which is I think I've mentioned before, the stereotype of the little old woman with her shawl on in the darkened room, possibly in a gypsy wagon sort of thing, with the crystal ball and all the tarot and all of that. So the
Yeah.
reason that stereotype exists is because of the spiritualist movement in the late 1800s to early 1900s. And all of that stuff led you to the foundation of Theosophy, which was the sort of major spiritualist revival, and that came about because of Helena Blavatsky. And she was a woman who, part of the reason that Theosophy took off at this time is that this was obviously sort of the 1800s. This was sort of a high point for things like the empire. And so there was quite a lot of archaeological discovery coming out of places like the Middle East, and there were trade routes being opened up to the Orient, out to China and out to India and places like that. And so Theosophy began basically finding Western mysticism and marrying that with Eastern mysticism, because there was this the tying between the two at the time. Because basically people realized, well, hey, there's a common Indo-Aryan ancestor to both parts of these things. So they've obviously sort of fractured off from each other. So there's similarities and points of interest there. And there was a lot of archaeological evidence coming out of the Middle East and sort of the Orient and that part of Asia as well. And so Theosophy took to marrying all of that together, along with the newer elements of science at the time, which was coming out, because this was, of course, also the same sort of time where things like the theory of evolution started really taking off, moving people away from the idea of the intelligent creator sort of thing. So it's like, no, actually, this is something that is evolving and changing, and therefore we can influence that. And it started taking those clearly evolving spiritualist roots and combining them with basically the sort of new science of evolution and its little subsections, which we now know to be kind of pseudoscientific, but also kind of a thing, and a lot of it depends on definitions of things like eugenics and Malthusianism. And so this sort of started drawing all of those things together. And this is why, when you look at the early spiritualism, things like theosophy, you find they make use of a lot of the Middle Eastern and Far Eastern symbolism. So you see things like, even the theosophical logo itself is like a Star of David with an Om in the middle of it. And they frequently make use of things like that with the winged sun symbol, which is the symbol you've probably seen but don't know the name of. It's the circle. It's the Egyptian thing, which is the circle representing the sun, and it's got the wings horizontally coming out of it, and they're very flat along the top and kind of turn up a little bit on either side. The reason that all of that stuff sort of became kind of trendy around that time was because these were all new discoveries, and these were things which were very they basically became sort of the upper crust thing de jour, as it were, that everyone was like, oh, this is, if you have an interest in these things, that means you're sort of part of this upper crust of society, because obviously you've got all of this money, you can go and you can travel to these far off exotic places and deal with all of these new interesting ideas, and you can afford to just go and vanish for 2 or 3 years and go and travel in India and go and live with all of these spiritual teachers of this far off, exotic religion that we don't really know everything about. And it just sort of rolled from there. And this is why it's quite interesting that feminism and theosophy, which was the ultimate sort of genesis of it, was basically really big and pushed by like a small number of very rich and influential women.
Yeah.
Mostly women. There were some men with it. And that's actually something that this book is actually quite good for, the occult feminism, which is obviously what we're here to talk about. That has sort of really helped to demonstrate that, because I've been sort of looking through all the people that I can find, and this is basically just has got a few sections which is basically just a who's who of just like legwork that I now don't have to do, which is nice, which ties all of them together.
True. Yeah. So, okay. I'm sorry, we're gonna get into the topic, but I'm just curious. So you have this is like the 1800s, and you have all of this kind of trendy spiritualism that's becoming cool, but only for elites, because normal people, they're just too busy and they don't get to travel, and of course they're poor, and going to far off exotic places was very, very expensive. I mean, it took a long time and you need a lot of free time on your hands to do it. Was there some was there a connection between this kind of trendy spiritualist or various spiritual movements that were going on and the Enlightenment? Was there some, because it seems like it's around the Industrial Revolution. Like, was this around like all these things kind of bleeding into each other in some way?
A little bit, I think. I think the Enlightenment technically started like a couple of hundred, like 100 or so years before that. I think I'm not exactly sure what the exact agreed upon dates of things like this are. Yeah, because it you're just sort of looking at a general evolution of ideas at the time, and it honestly, a lot of this stuff just seems to have been kind of a perfect storm. And I'm happy to say that that's just my opinion on it.
Sure.
But a lot of stuff just seems to have lined up very, very well. Like, you got a bunch of, like, you had a society that was quite insular, as a lot of them were at the time, just because people couldn't move. There was no such thing as mass transit, really, outside of seafaring vessels. But their idea of mass transit was like, oh, we're able to move a couple of hundred people at a time. Ooh, yeah, really? Okay, great. We've got things that can do that in cities, and there's thousands of them running around all the time. But that was their idea of it.
Yeah.
And it was a time when you started getting empire happening. So you started obviously having the British Empire, having the Portuguese and the French, and they were really going out and going to all these far off places and coming back. And so there was sort of this almost of going to all of these far off flung places. And because of that, you started getting exposed to all sorts of other spiritual ideas, all sorts of other religious ideas. Because if you look at a lot of the, like, basically almost all the religious schisms for like the last millennia throughout Europe have basically all been varying flavors of Christianity fighting each other over whose particular opinion about it was right or wrong. And suddenly you're like, oh, there's actually all of these other things that are happening. And they started sort of being just more exposed to them, as opposed to like, okay, we know that there are other places far off with different religions and different ideas. Like, we know that they exist, but with the expansion of empire, those things started becoming more accessible because you started getting more trade, you started getting more flows of ideas, more flows of people and things like that. And as a result of that, I think you started getting people moving more away from the
Abrahamic
sort of
Christian traditions, you mean?
not necessarily moving away from the Abrahamic per se, but that was also the time where you had the Protestant ideal, which would eventually morph itself into the scientific method. And this is, you know, where you get some of the angry atheists who are like, no, science is not religion. No, it is. It's there. There's a reason why the phrase, what, I don't remember who said it, but the one where it's like, if you take a sip from the chalice of science, you'll be an atheist. But if you drink to the bottom of it, God is waiting, sort of thing. Yeah. It's basically the idea that if you follow it back far enough to its origin point, you do eventually end up at something religious, because religious and spiritual underpinnings is basically the underpinning for everything eventually when you go back far enough. And the scientific method grew out of basically Protestantism, because Protestantism, one branch of it.
It makes sense because, I mean, like, you know, Isaac Newton was religious, but he's Isaac Newton. So it's not like those things couldn't coexist. So
all the scientific people at the time were religious, and so out of this part of Protestantism, you ended up with this idea of people basically observing the world and saying, there is an underlying order to everything. Like, if I drop this thing, it will fall consistently at this speed, obviously referencing Newton here. And no matter where I am, it does the same thing. It doesn't matter how high up I am, it reaches a terminal velocity and then it falls consistently. So there is a bit of build up and then it hits terminal and then it just keeps going. And I can be standing on top of a building and do it, it'll be the same. I can be standing on the ground and do it. I can go underground into the tunnels and do it, it'll be the same. I could climb to the top of a mountain and do it, it'll be the same. And all of these things, and obviously you had other things as well, like people started dabbling around with things like physics, and you started getting people understanding things like lenses and how you can refract and split light into different colors and things like that. And it was all of these things taken together, and especially also you had a lot of art as well, and a lot of art theory, obviously a lot of sort of color theory and things like that. The science of how you would create things like that. And there were a lot of questions also around things like music. Something which, I suppose a bit of a tangent here, was actually called the gay science, which some people will recognize as the title of one of Nietzsche's works. But the reason that he picked that title was because the phrase the gay science is actually a troubadouric reference. So for people who sing and perform, because there was believed... Yes. So because there was sort of believed to be a science behind the multiple elements of a performance like that. So that this is where you start talking about things like the Apolline and the Dionysus of stage play to music, and combining the two things together, and why do people enter into these sort of states of almost like meditative transcendence when they view things that are beautiful. And it started creating all these ideas that there is some underlying order to these things, and that we are in some way keyed to respond to them. But the idea that all of these things have like some underlying order to them, the ability to reproduce those things, that is where the scientific method came from.
Yes,
So it,
yes.
it grew in it, like inevitably almost out of that, because if you look at the way that as the religious would say, God created things, well, they were created with a set of rules. And then the scientific method is just, how do we understand those rules? Now, it doesn't require
Right.
you to actually believe in God to observe those rules, but the people who observed that these things are constant, they were religious at the time, and it was from that that you got the idea that, oh, there is an overarching order to this thing.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I thought that was worth bringing up because I think that when we are going to talk about feminism and its relationship to the occult, I think for me, it's important to put in context that, like, you know, we didn't, like, our society is far more secular now than it was. And so we got to look at, like, what, well, you know, because my first thought would be, why would women's liberation even require a spiritual, like, sort of birthplace? And I think that when you understand, like, how humans were, it's that would partly perhaps answer that question. I don't know, like, and I think that it's all about essentially just inverting everything. I mean, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's because I listened to Rachel Wilson's book, so I have it on audio. I listened to it. It was a while ago, and there was a lot of interesting stuff in it. And then I watched most of your video where you reviewed her book. And I think that, but like by and large, outside of, you know, and just for full disclosure, guys, Rachel Wilson, who wrote the book, who I'm waiting to hear back from her about coming on the show. She said she would, but she got sick, and we'll see. We'll have her on at some point. She wrote this book from the perspective of an Orthodox Christian. And the Orthodox Church is, like, a lot of people call it the weird church. It's like Jonathan Pajot, who, like, has that channel called The Symbolic World. He is an Orthodox Christian. And so she's writing from that perspective. But if you can sort of, like, you know, understand where her biases are at and just look at what she's saying, there is a lot of interesting stuff. And I think it might be her first book. I don't know, though. I didn't honestly look at her to see if she's written more, but I know that she self-published this one. And yeah, everything else is no, that's really her only book from what I can see. So that being said, though, she goes into essentially this whole well, actually, let me just read the summary and then we'll get into Teal Deer's video. Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation, dives deep into the occult roots of the movement, detailing the lives of some of its most prominent figures and the esoteric beliefs that inspired and motivated them. Since the 1970s, everything we learn about the history of the women's movement has been subject to gatekeeping by radicals who run women's studies departments in universities. Frankly, I don't think they're radical. I think that it's pretty much like normal feminism. There's no radical feminism. There's just feminism. But there's an entire history that has been obscured from public view. Rachel Wilson brings this history to life, filled with incredible true stories of demon worship, spirit mediums, magic mushrooms, witchcraft, CIA spies, and sex cults. There's nothing boring about the real history of feminism, and it's all here. So I thought it was super fascinating to learn about, although a lot of it is stuff that I already knew, but there were some pretty interesting things about it. So I guess, Teal Deer, what are your, I don't know, anything you want to get into regarding this book that you thought stood out or you found extra interesting?
Well, yes, the orthodox bias was one thing that stood out, where a fairly copious amount of the notes which I've got written and went through in that video is just, okay, this is where the bias, you know, the author starts going full orthodox at you, and here's why this is wrong. And it's annoying that I have to do that, and it's normally just because it's a bunch of fairly standard Christian lies regarding paganism, which annoyed me a little bit, but we don't really have to go into that in any notable depth, because frankly it's kind of par the course when you get people who buy into one religion wholeheartedly. Obviously at that point all other religions are wrong. It just would have been nice if you could, like, keep a lid on that almost, because it's to me that spoils the bits of the book which are actually, like, good, and there is a lot of good stuff that is in there. As I even said in my introduction write-up of it, like, although the introduction of my write-up, I say, like, yeah, I've gone pretty hard on this thing in the introduction, but there is a lot of good stuff in it, and I want to talk about those now. But that is one thing that really did.
Yeah, I just want to give people a warning
out
about that too. If you read it, you might feel preached at, and to a degree, you are being preached at. But that doesn't mean that there's no value in it.
Yeah, I mean, I put it in. Yeah, my relationship when it comes to the Christians is, for the most part, I put them in the 51% category, where it's like, okay, there's more agreement than disagreement. I'm happy to leave it there, and we can just chat about things that we find interesting while not going into the 49% that is disagreement.
Yeah, I presume, and it's not important either way, but I presume that you're an atheist, right?
Defining myself that way is easier than actually explaining what I am.
Okay,
so yes,
fine. I that's okay. I called myself agnostic for many years because I didn't want to answer the question, mostly because I don't really know how to answer it. But
well, it's always a difficult one for people to explain, because you end up with people where they're like, well, atheism just really means like not holding to a particular theistic thing, which would be religion, and therefore a lot of people would say yes because you're not part of a structured thing, but they still hold a bunch of like non-materialistic beliefs on top of that. Like they have beliefs in some sort of metaphysic thing there.
Yeah.
Anyway, underneath it, and it's just it's just a way that people phrase things, really, because it's like, I have thoughts and I can't be bothered to deal with explaining them right now. So
yeah. But either way, I'm bringing this up because, again, I think that people tend to be religious minded regardless. I mean, you only have to look at, and we're talking about like the overwhelming majority of people, regardless of what they tell you their faith is, they do have a tendency to behave in a religious or at least ritualistic fashion. If you remember the Summer of Love, when there were all these riots going on, there were people washing the feet of blacks in protest. I mean, they were engaging in religious rituals. So it's weird, but I mean, I think it is is something about human nature that is just like really hard to shake, and that's why I'm fascinated by this, because I think that women's liberation or feminism could have simply been political, but it's not. It's obviously not, because it isn't even logical. It's purely religions and feels based.
Yeah, I think that there is some degree of truth to the idea that humans are almost hardwired to have some sort of metaphysical belief, even if it doesn't manifest as God or gods. But even if it's just even if it's just believing in things that have no basis in reality, like the idea of you being lucky or unlucky.
Yep.
Like,
or being
luck doesn't exist.
Born in the wrong body or something.
Yeah, it's like a lot of these things, like they don't exist. Like, if you think you're a lucky person, you're not. It's just like you're just not. You're subject to a lot of things by random chance. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, like, yeah, we might be able to quantify some of that, but across the entirety of your lifetime, you're going to end up somewhere around the average, like everyone else. So you're thinking that this is a thing that's happening. It's no, you're giving into some sort of metaphysical thinking there. And I think some of the other cases of examples of metaphysical thinking, it seems to just be an evolutionary adaptation. I know that we're going far afield from the book here, but
no, it's okay. I'm coming back to the book, but I think I wanted to at least like sort of establish that, because I do think that it's not something we can easily ignore. So
no, I think a lot of it stems from the ability of humans to project their minds into other circumstances, and also our tendency to be able to personify and anthropomorphize things. Because if you look at a lot of the origins of religion, it's basically just all animism, which is personification and anthropomorphizing nature. It's like
Yeah.
it's imagining the rocks having a human will or a human desire, the lake having some sort of will or some sort of desire, being happy about things, being mad about things. The mountains, they do the same thing. All
Yes.
of this other stuff is just building and building and building and allowing that thing to grow. And I think this is just simply a natural evolution of being, frankly, a big brained animal, like a big brained social animal. Like, you have to have the ability to understand how other people think in order to be social. You have to be able to do things like that. You have to be able to project yourself into other people's shoes. You have to be able to pass things like the Sally Ann test, which most people do. They don't learn to do that. That's something that turns on innately about 3 years old, roughly.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to do all of these things. It's also like, why are there plenty of psychological studies regarding things like violence and suicide? Like, why do most people actually at some point in their lives think about if they were to kill themselves or think about murdering people? Like, it's things like that are amazingly common. Like, if people feel bad for their, like, oh, I shouldn't be thinking about murdering this person. No, you're completely normal. Trust me, everyone does it. Literally everyone. And the reason that you have those little thoughts, those random desires, that little voice at the back of your head when you're on a high thing that's saying, what if you jumped though? But what if you did though? Like, the ability to do that is projecting yourself into the future so that you can kill literally millions of versions of yourself and other people in hypothetical manners so that you, the actual material one that exists, doesn't die. And I think just you take all of that stuff together, that is the foundation for metaphysics as far as I can see it. It just seems to be something that is basically almost like a maladaptation, but it works.
Yeah.
And it just seems to be there, almost as a byproduct. And so I think it's inevitable, frankly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think so too. That's why I said, like, this should be an interesting look. So, okay. One of the first things, I think you guys in the audience might already know this, but we do have some new people, so maybe you don't. One of the first things, I think, or at least one of the more important things that her book reveals, is something that we have talked about in the past, which is that feminism or women's liberation is not, in fact, a grassroots movement. It did not develop organically, and it was not the case that most women actually wanted this. Now, I don't know if that was at all surprising to you.
Not particularly.
No, not particularly, right. But what's the
I base that purely on the modern incarnation of it, because anytime you look at these feminist things that come out, like, anything can happen somewhere in the world and suddenly you have a bunch of these far left progressive types, and this doesn't have to be specifically related to feminism, but feminism is a part of it, that the general social justice milieu, the general cause that they all rally around, because they are all fundamentally progressives and Marxists. Like, there's no way of getting around that. And anything happens, and within hours you can have coach loads of people with pre-made signs that are all the same. Like, it's obviously not stuff that's been scrawled on a bit of paper with some felt tip pens. They're printed out, and there's dozens or hundreds of them, which literally means when you get things like some police officer does his job and something goes a little awry somewhere, like, the next day, all of these things show up. It's like, I'm sorry, there is something obviously behind this. There is something funding this. There is something arranging this. And we know that there are these big slush fund activist groups sort of things. And it's providing the capital that allows those things to manifest as we see them. Like, you can't avoid seeing those things unless you are willfully blind to it. And that's just in the modern time. You see these things happening. So it doesn't surprise me at all that was the entire basis for the movement, frankly.
Yeah, of course. And these kinds of, like, lefty commie movements can only actually manifest in a time of, well, relative comfort, right? So when people have, like right now, people are demanding free shit because we live in such a great time, but it's somewhere, where people are on the verge of poverty and there's a high crime rate and a low life expectation. People are not thinking about that. They're not worried about, free internet or whatever. So, what's something that about this book that you really do want to like touch on that you thought was particularly interesting or that you needed to refute, I suppose?
Well, I mean, we can go through the fact that this was totally not grassroots.
Yes.
I mean, at that point, you're looking at who were some of the early people and where did their funding come from, and there is actually basically an entire chapter about that, and it goes through and it talks about not only Blavatsky.
Right? Not the Rockefellers.
Yeah. Rockefellers do get named a couple of times.
No, Vanderbilt is the one I was trying to remember. Vanderbilt.
Yeah, they also get it as well. Because as it turns out, you get people like Helena Blavatsky and Annie Besant as well, who is also mentioned. And these are people who ended up getting fair amounts of funding from a lot of these organizations, people like the Rockefellers and people like the Vanderbilts. I'm trying to quickly find the exact names of it in my in the write-up here. Let's see if I can. No, I think I've gone past it. Doesn't matter. But the point is that there is a lot of ties between those things, and you end up realizing that a lot of the publishing companies that a lot of these women would start running, because of course they all had publishing companies being funded by people, and as it turns out, it's always like a rich person that's funding it, because of course it is. Like, how else are you going to run
Of course, and is it often a rich man too?
Yes.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, like the journal Lucifer, which was it was written by one of Blavatsky's adepts. That was Mabel Collins, who funded that, who wrote for that. Yeah, and a lot of these things just end up hanging. Let me see if I can find quickly. It would really help if I could spell Vanderbilt doing a word search.
It's all right. In the meantime, I'm gonna read a super chat that I just got while you're looking for that. Iggy Thunders gives us $5 and says, Brian, have you reached out to Six Hexenhammer? He's a curator for occult literature and a buddy of Razors for $5. Thank you, Iggy. No, I mean, I did like a while ago. Like a while ago, I reached out to him and he was interested, but I haven't heard from him in a bit, and it's okay. I'm not all that concerned. Like, I mean, it'd be nice, but I don't know if I'm gonna hear from him, but I'd be curious. I don't know what his thoughts are on like this kind of stuff in terms of like, feminism as a hate movement or whatever. He might be one of these kind of, moderate simps that were like, oh, at one point in history, this was a good thing, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know, but I will try again, Iggy. I did want to get him on. I don't know if that would be a really great topic, but it could be. Okay, Teal, did you find it?
Yes, I did. I will quickly say on the simping for feminism thing, everyone goes through that, I think, because you're so steeped in feminism being the good thing. Like, you are literally told that from birth, and so I think everyone has that opinion at some point. It's just a case of basically getting them to realize that they've been lied to their entire life about that, which
it's hard too. It's hard. When people learn that. I can understand it makes them angry.
Yeah, and also, I suppose a psychological tangent there. When people have deeply held beliefs like that, if something actually challenges them, paradoxically for most people, it ends up pushing them deeper into the belief rather than pulling them out of it. So what you have to do is you normally just have to keep presenting it, but in such a way that they become receptive to it to a point where they end up thinking that it was their own idea. Like they have to read themselves out of it, because unsurprisingly, no amount of finding people and just screaming, it's this thing, wake up, sheeple, like, unsurprisingly, that doesn't work.
It doesn't.
Whoever would have guessed, but it doesn't. You have to sort of give people time and space to
Yeah, I know.
breathe it in, as it were.
People. You gotta let them figure it out on their own.
Yeah.
I
So
understand that.
on the topic of the who gets the funding and whatnot, we can talk. You can talk about people that were mentioned in this book, um, like the Woodall sisters, Victoria and Tennessee Woodall, under the maiden name Claflin. They were a pair of con artists. They traveled around America using fraudulent mediumship, clairvoyance, and spiritual healing. So very much in line with the spiritualist way of doing things. Like, oh, we're going to do tarot readings and we're going to wave candles at people, and they would actually also try to cure people with effectively snake oil potions and magnets and all the typical new age nonsense. And so they were basically constantly on the road as a means of avoiding legal action against them. And they would end up having a house somewhere in New York, and they would end up actually in a personal and professional relationship, the pair of them, with Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was one of the richest people in the time. He's one of the rail moguls of the era, and effectively basically one of the richest people to have ever lived. He repeatedly made use of them as spiritualist mediums, so they would put on their headscarf and dim the lights and go, "Ooh, spirits, they are talking to me," and he would believe everything that they said. But as it turns out, the sisters had a third friend, Josie Mansfield, who was a prostitute who was plying her trade to a bunch of Wall Street bankers. So effectively, they were committing fraud, because they were basically just buying tips off, pillow talk tips off of this prostitute, and then presenting them to this guy.
Yeah.
Who then would go on to fund a paper that they would, because of course he would fund their publication, which was Woodall and Claflin Weekly, which by very odd coincidence was the first publication in the Western world to carry the Communist Manifesto translated into English. What an interesting coincidence that is.
That is an interesting coincidence. So you can see that the sort of, I don't know, the threads, right? Feminism does not exist in a vacuum, obviously, and it's part of, I think. Well, I don't want to get into that right now, but so we got the what you were saying about these various, pretty either rich people or people who were connected to rich people, like the woman who was a prostitute. That sort of like, got this ball rolling. Is there anything about like how it really started? Like, are we talking, did this come out of Protestantism or out of Christianity itself, or is it just like the way of female nature to, like, no matter where you are in the world, there's going to be women trying to, seize power essentially in their own subtle way?
Yes.
Am I making sense? I don't know if I'm making
sense. Yes. No, it's what you're seeing here, I think, is it is the perfect storm of what was happening at the time, and just female nature expressed within that environment.
Yeah.
I think there's a reason why feminism came about just now, just so happened to coincide with the Industrial Revolution. It all just so happened to coincide with that, just so happened to coincide with the advent of hormonal birth control, just so happened to come out at a time when humanity basically made it so that 90-something% of people didn't have to be engaged in agriculture in order to live.
Yes. Right. We had
I think
much
it's
comfort.
Inevitable.
What was that?
I just think that this is an inevitable thing. Like, you're just seeing human nature, and in that instance, female nature being expressed within the environment. Because anytime you see other countries going through similar industrialization, places like China, for instance, you actually see the exact same patterns of behavior arising.
Right.
A lot of there's one of the biggest studies which I've ever referenced, on my channel regarding the practice of hypergamy, which is a female mating strategy of equal to or greater social status than themselves. And what a surprise, that stuff just kicks up more and more and more as that country industrialized. Same things are happening in India now. Like, why are all of these problems arising in those two countries, like, now, whereas they've been happening in the West as of about 50 years ago? It's because they're a few decades behind on the scale of industrialization. And now that they're catching up, they're exhibiting all of the same problems as well. And they're doing that despite the fact that they have different economic things, because obviously we're looking at, you can't call it free market exchange. We don't have that in the West. Our markets are far too controlled and influenced by the government for that to be true. But you've got that happening there, and then you've got the communists in China. So something completely different economic model. India, they're closer to us in that regard.
This is related, but did you know about Kim Jong-un in North Korea?
I am aware of his existence. Yes.
Yes.
What did he do now?
Okay. He made a speech. He did like a plea to North Korean women to make babies because their birth rates are in decline. So North Korea, probably the most authoritarian country in the world that I know of, anyway, run by a communist dictator. He basically still has to essentially beg women to make babies so that his country can continue to because without people you have no country. But the funniest thing is that North Korea's replacement rate, or their birth rate, is still higher than South Korea's, which is like in real serious danger of imploding. So
yeah, and the advantage of also being able to cite places like North Korea and other very insular nations like Japan is that basically allows you to, again, you're still seeing the same thing, and this is just basically as a result of technological advancement. Because of the insular nature of places like Japan and North Korea, it basically allows you to start indicating that this is not like a westernizing effect. This is not like empire going in and saying, you're going to have markets our way, you're going to worship our god, you're going to eat our food, you're going to dress like we are. It doesn't seem like that's the case. Maybe you could make a case for a sort of unified globalizing effect where all of these things come together, but I think even then you're pushing it, given how insular some of those countries are.
Yeah.
And so this just sort of leads me more towards saying I think that this is more something that humans will just manifest when you put them in the environment that you're in.
Yep. Anyway, so I just thought I would mention that yeah, I think this is really, it ultimately comes down to the perfect storm of industrialization, the birth control pill, and when female nature just manifesting. So let's get back to the book. So what's another thing that that we could talk about that was of interest to you?
Well, it's also interesting, while we talk about things like lowering birth rates, there was an interesting thing that a bunch of the anti-suffragists, which was actually most people throughout history who started opposing these things, they predicted a bunch of these problems and were like, apparently if women go out and work, then you're going to start seeing declining birth rates. And that
of course
happened.
Because they're going to be working instead of making babies.
Yes. And this is, I suppose, where we do have to address the trad cuck argument, which I've been seeing a lot these days, is people literally just saying, just get married and have babies, bro. Everything will be fine, bro. Society will reverse itself, bro. It won't. You're literally just telling men to shove themselves into a meat grinder that's going to kill them. Please don't do that.
Yes. Well, I've mentioned this many times. There was And this is gonna okay. You know, Lyndon Perry or LP. He has a channel called I Hypocrite. I think he had you on his show once, but maybe not.
If he did, I don't remember it at
Okay,
all.
it doesn't matter. He used to do men's rights content, and then he kind of like is more of like a general sort of, right wing guy. And he talks about, he has a series of videos called "You Can't Stop Progress" that he puts out every Sunday. They're very popular. It's basically just pure cringe and the fall. It's like recording the fall of society, the fall of the West. But I remember I had him on, or I was on his channel or something once, and he was saying that he thinks that men should just lead and that women will follow. This is kind of a trad cuck position. And I said, I don't think that's going to happen. And I said, it's because we've liberated women too much. and he didn't believe me. He thought, no, this is what's going to happen. But that's not happening. There was a study that he went through not that long ago that showed, I think it was Generation Z, men are moving further, politically to the right. And I use that in quotes because I don't think it's a very clearly defined thing. But what I think it means is that firstly that boys are looking to embrace their masculinity, and I think that being masculine is seen as being right wing by basically everybody, and that women are moving further left, and so they're moving further apart, and it makes sense. And he said, well, I guess they're not going to follow, and it's like, yeah, because why should they? Like, so it is going to be a problem, and it's not going to be enough for men to simply man up. That's just not going to work. So, yeah, I'm just saying I agree with you.
Yeah, well, this is what happens, unfortunately, when you get people who attempt to deny that women exhibit mate preference.
Yeah.
Because well, how are you going to man up and get these women? Well, apparently the answer is 6 figures, 6 packs, 6 foot, 6 inches. So every man has to be literally the top 1% of humanity. Yes. Mathematically, that doesn't work out. Women are asking for the impossible if that is the case.
Yeah, unless they want to be a part of a harem, which is kind of where it's going.
Yeah, so it's you can't just like this just man up, bro. Just do all this stuff. That's not going to work.
No.
The actual problem in that scenario is female demand. And you cannot say that because people get very upset.
They do. I'm bringing this up a lot. It's like, well, you're going to have to change women's preferences the only way, and nobody wants to do it.
And that's what I find so bizarre about that, because they get offended by that. And it's like, are you offended over the idea that women have standards and desires and things that they want? Like, why do you not want to acknowledge that?
Yeah, I know. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but it is frustrating because I see it everywhere. It's like, I don't know. I think it's cowardice, and I don't understand it. It's like the people are more afraid to call out women than anything else, any other group of people. I mean, people will call out, minority groups, and they'll call out trans people and drag queen story hour and fucking Jews. Like, they'll call all of that out. Islamists, but women, oh no, they can't do it. Anyway, so yeah, that's we're in this mess. So declining birth rates, we were talking about that.
Yes, that stems from the anti-suffrage people who pointed out that if you end up effectively removing the division of labor and also, well, doing what we've mentioned before, which is obliterating the home economy. And this is something that this book points out when mentioning the anti-suffrage movement, the anti-suffrage artwork and whatnot, and the objections that they had to it. They called it like a century ago, and they were right about it. And this, again, indicates, is sort of another part of the, this was never grassroots, because it has always actually been an unpopular position. Like the feminist position was always the unpopular one. It was never the one that most people actually wanted in
Yeah.
society, and yet somehow it still ended up getting passed. And that's because it just seems like you had this small number of people who were funding these things. So we mentioned that Vanderbilt's involved in this. There are plenty of other rich people who have bankrolled this, and it's just it's very interesting because there is kind of a who's who sort of list of things that sort of shows you this. It's from chapter 5. I might actually just read through that because it is only a couple of pages, and I've got that there. I mean, I could actually just do the entire review of chapter 5, which is an interesting one.
In chapter 5, do you remember the name of that chapter?
I will look it up. Let's see.
Guys, feel free to send us a super chat, a super chow by going to feedthebadger.com/just the tip. It will allow you to firstly make sure we get all of the funds, because when you do a super chat, YouTube takes a good chunk of it. And if you don't want to give them your money, I understand. So you can go to super chow, super chow us at feedthebadger.com/just the tip. And if you're on Rumble, you can send us a Rumble rant, and I will prioritize super chows and Rumble rants over super chats. So anyway, we want to drive traffic to those places because I think Rumble is a very good platform. A lot of potential. Okay. Did you find it?
Let's get ready to rumble, etc. That should definitely be something you should add to the soundboard. But yes, chapter 5 is funding for the passage of the 19th Amendment. I'll go through my write-up on it, and that will include the couple of paragraphs, which basically just gives you a bunch of who's who, because frankly, I suck at remembering names. So in the first part of chapter 5, the author talks about women's suffrage and its immense lack of popularity. And actually, she does have some statistics in there to back it up by talking about the exact numbers, or some of the numbers from like early polling, that sort of indicates its lack of uptick for it. These we don't really need to cover because they've been covered numerous times over the years anyway. It also includes some examples of anti-suffrage artwork and the propaganda posters, and some of the observations which came true, such as the lowering birth rates. My note here is just, once again, I would suggest the impacts of industry and birth control, with feminism being more of a symptom of this sort of underlying thing. And there's obviously caveats for feedback loops in certain bits of behavior. But as I said earlier in the write-up of this, I think a lot of this stuff, you're seeing feminism as the reaction, part of the reaction, not the reagent of these things. So the more interesting part of this, the early section of this chapter, is the observation that laws for suffrage, along with others such as gay marriage rights, seem to pass despite being unpopular with the public at the time. And that, of course, points the author in the direction of who's funding all of this. Like, how does this stuff happen?
Yeah.
And so from here, we'll just go from like page 65, I guess, to 67, just because like I said, it's a list of names, and I suck at names. So perhaps the largest financier of the women's suffrage movement was Alva Vanderbilt Belmont, born Alva Erskine Smith in Mobile, Alabama in 1853. She was born to a wealthy family. Her mother was the daughter of a U.S. congressman, and her father was a successful commission merchant. In 1875, she married William Kissam Vanderbilt, grandson of Cornelius Vanderbilt, who you may remember from his infamous dealings with Victoria Woodhull, who I think we mentioned earlier, her and her sister. So the Vanderbilts were one of the wealthiest, most influential families in the world at the time. Cornelius not only had an affair with Victoria's sister Tennessee, but he funded the two sisters' newspapers, Woodhull and Claflin Weekly, which they used to promote their ideas on free love, sex education, legalization of prostitution, vegetarianism, short skirts, women's rights, and no-fault divorce and suffrage. Interesting that they know no-fault divorce, which of course is part of the reason we're in the mess that we're in.
We're talking the 1800s?
Yes, this is late 1800s.
So this is way before no-fault divorce was in law, I think.
Yes.
And there was
this
apparently
would have been in the 1870s.
Yeah, and apparently women's liberation is sort of like running parallel to things like sexual degeneracy and vegetarianism.
Yeah, that's yeah. Again, this is all just tying into the general spiritualism that is going on here.
No,
It's
I think so.
yeah. I do again have deeper notes on that in the full write up, which people can go and watch in their own time. But I also do have some notes throughout this that I think that even just the term women's liberation is actually a spiritual term. I don't think it actually means a legal term.
I think that
because of its new age links.
Rachel Wilson says to be liberal is to be a slave or something, which sounds like an oxymoron, but I think she does explain it a little bit. But anyway, go ahead.
The Christian calling someone else a slave.
Yeah.
Nietzsche is amused. Remember, this is in the 1870s, but it's the same exact agenda of the counterculture radicals and the second wavers of the 1960s. This is important to note because, as you'll see, it's been the same wealthy families pushing this agenda for over a century. It's also important to note that William K. Vanderbilt was a founding member of the Jekyll Island Club, which is where representatives of the richest men in the world met in secret in 1910 to draft legislation to establish central banking in America under the Federal Reserve Act. Alva and William K. Vanderbilt had 3 children together before their divorce due to his infidelities in 1895. This is another thing which you note throughout this book. Basically, every single one of these women is divorced. Like, almost all of the women that you get from this, they come from divorce and usually end up very rich as a result of it, which is, again, just a very interesting thing that keeps cropping up over and over. So at the time when divorce was rare among the elite, Alva was awarded a financial settlement of over 10 million, which is the equivalent of over 320 million in 2021. All that for marrying someone and then deciding she didn't want to be married anymore.
Wow.
Yeah. It's amazing how many of the richest women in the world get there by divorce and how that's never changed.
Yeah.
As well as she also got several of Vanderbilt's estates in that divorce as well. So this made her one of the richest women in the world. So 1 year later, she remarried to Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont, one of her ex-husband's friends. Oliver Belmont was the son of August Belmont, who was a wealthy investment banker for the Rothschild family. Oliver was a playboy with an affinity for absinthe gambling and visiting brothels. He was sent to Germany to learn investment banking from the Rothschilds, like his father, who was U.S. Congressman Perry Belmont. Oliver was married to his first wife, Sarah, at the time, but his addictions and carousing led to divorce. Oliver was a member of his father's banking firm, member of at least 2 elite secretive societies, which was the Lambs and the Sons of Revolution, as well as a delegate to the Democratic National Convention in 1900 and a member of Congress from 1901 to 1902. The author goes on to note about the societies that he was a member of, the Lambs being America's oldest theatrical club, which was founded in 1874 and is still located adjacent to the Rockefeller Center in New York City, and was a precursor to the Screen Actors Guild, which is very influential in Hollywood these days.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Sons of Revolution, which is an elite hereditary fraternity organization, started in 1876. The organization states its purpose as historical education and preservation, but it has a bunch of proofs that you basically have to be able to show that you have male ancestors who assisted American independence in order to get in. Otherwise, you're not welcome.
Yeah.
And she notes that that organization has had a bunch of very influential members, such as George Bush Jr. and Sr., who, of course, are also known to be members of the Skull and Bones Society and things like that. So she includes the history of Alva and her husbands in order to demonstrate her connections with wealthy elites and their positions of power and influence, where their vast fortunes came from, and their membership in secret societies. And upon his death, Alva dedicated her life. Upon his death, Alva dedicated her life to feminist causes, including suffrage. She donated vast sums of money to women's suffrage organizations in both the UK and the US. She frequently paid the bail of picketers and demonstrators in the suffrage movement. Yeah, where have we seen that before in recent times? And she funded and organized large rallies and marches. Again, where have we seen this? She founded the Political Equality League in 1909 to help gain votes for suffrage supporting candidates in New York. She purchased office space for the National American and Women's Suffrage Association and funded its National Press Bureau. She convened a Conference of Great Women in 1914 at Marble House, which was one of her many inherited sprawling estates. Mm-hmm. She organized fundraisers attended by various wealthy New York elite, and is regarded by historians as being one of the largest single contributors to the financial success of the suffrage movement.
Sounds like a bunch of stuff that's still going on today. I mean,
yeah,
like it hasn't changed. Okay,
the author does go on to mention another character, Phoebe Hearst, who has a very similar sort of history, as it were, who I think it was she married someone who, of course, died and left her a huge fortune worth millions. She went on to become a benefactor of the University of Berkeley in California, started establishing all sorts of spiritualist and cross-religious sorts of organizations. You find a bunch of these women who do this as well. These trans-denominational and cross-denominational sorts of organizations, because again, all of this stuff ties into the New Age spiritualism side of it, which is very important for a lot of them. And the reason that trans-denomination is very important to them, and one of the women mentioned and throughout this book, the author does mention that even the United Nations has things like trans-denominational New Age caucuses at them for religions, actually aiming at creating a sort of unified one world religion, and that's actually a thing that they have. So it's just very interesting that there is that to it there. And the reason that the term trans-denomination is very, very important is because that is actually a term that is specifically tied to the occult belief of Rosicrucianism. It's a term that they use because the point of the Rosicrucians was going out and going into all sorts of existing cultures, adopting their way of dress, adopting their cultures and things like that, but then subverting them into one world religion. Basically, they went out with this express aim to basically say, yeah, no, all religions can totally coexist. They just become one thing.
Huh. Yeah. You know, we didn't get into Margaret Sanger yet, but I was just looking up. I don't know if you've seen this, because I think this is totally related. It's called the Jaffe Memo, and it was essentially the mission statement put out by Planned Parenthood and its affiliates. Because one of the things that I'm trying to get at is what does women's liberation want? It's not liberation for women. I don't think that's what it is, because there were, like you said, a lot of women were not for this. And yet, I think that they have been conditioned to, go along with it. I'm not saying that they wouldn't otherwise, but I'm saying that you went with from something that was very unpopular to something that is now normalized. And there was something in this Jaffe Memo that I want to share. But before I do, I did get a super chow, and I want to read it really quick. So thank you, Asthrun, for giving a $5. And he says, interesting how the Vanderbilts, Dutch Americans, had all this influence while also being Freemasons, or a Freemason is how he wrote it. But I think you mean that one of them was a Freemason or whatever. This talk makes me want to dive more into Manly P. Hall's writing. He. Yes, she mentions Freemasons a lot in her book, that there were many people that were members of that. Right? So...
yeah, it's not really a surprise. Again, I do address this in the longer write-up, which I've got. Whenever you mention things like Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism and whatnot, a bunch of people seem to have this knee-jerk reaction of everything you're about to say is a conspiracy theory.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, but Freemasonry exists. Like they're a
Yes, there's
fraternal organization. They are a fraternal organization. It's basically a men's organization where a bunch of guys get together and, for the most part, socialize.
yeah, there's a Freemason building right by my house here in Virginia. I drive
Yeah,
past it every day. I
yeah.
mean, I've
It's
never
like
been in there, but yeah.
yeah, it's not exactly difficult to get into lodges and join them. You literally just find people who are members and say, "Hey, can I come to the thing?" Like it
But
normally
there isn't
helps if
like a
you
secret
befriend them a bit
handshake or
first.
like a password or something.
I'm not at liberty
You
to
know,
discuss these things,
there
but
isn't
if you
like a
just
brand
find
that you have to show the palm of your hand to, and
but if you just find people who are members, you can get invited in. They literally are, for the most part, just social clubs. But
ah,
as soon as you mention them, people are just
yeah, I
like,
don't. I'm
conspiracy
sorry. Go ahead.
theory. It's again, it is also like when you talk about, say, Rosicrucianism. Um, Again, people are just like, but my conspiracy theories. What the? How is it a conspiracy theory to observe the fact that there were a bunch of uh, pages which were written by the founder of it, and this ended up attracting a lot of attention amongst some rich people who found it very, very interesting. And there were a bunch of people who started attempting to write their own versions of it, their own sort of occult little things as a means of getting attention of people who were part of Rosicrucianism because they wanted to get into it because it was sort of seen as this like elite social thing to be a member
Yeah,
of it. It had a sort of degree of social cachet to it.
yeah.
Like, how is this conspiracy theories that people like
So
literally the people meet and talk about things?
yeah, it totally exists. I mean, it's not a conspiracy if it's real, but then I mean, there could be conspiracies. Conspiracies are real, but the existence of Freemasonry is not like some kind of unprovable myth. So then, why would it be worth bringing up in Rachel's book if it's so mundane? That'd be like saying, Vanderbilt was also a member of the bowling team in this city, or he went to this lodge and hung out with other men that were hunting deer or something. Like, is there something about it that makes it remarkable, or is it just this kind of, popular idea that if someone is a part of the Freemasons, then that means that makes this more significant?
Part of me thinks that it's just because they are secretive societies, and it's always interesting that people are members of these things.
Yeah.
But a lot of them do actually have underlying religious and spiritual beliefs that they aim to promulgate through it. And that ties into some of what they do because it ends up as one of the sort of driving principles and driving forces behind the actions of some of its members.
Mm. It makes me wonder if, because I mean, I was interested in joining the Freemasons when I first moved here and I saw there was a building, but the only reason why was because I have been talking about on this show how important I think it is that men, have like a place for them to fraternize and mentor each other and spend time with each other without the oversight of women, without the oversight of feminism. And I think that is an important thing. But then, I learn that it's very hard to get into it or whatever from some people. I don't know. I never really followed up. I even sent them an email, and I don't think I ever heard back when I first came here because I wanted to see, what is this? This is a space for men. Is it good or whatever? But then, like, when you hear about Freemasonry, you hear about something that is clandestine and like you're not supposed to know about it, and therefore it makes it suspicious. And this makes me think, in I would say throughout, most of our history, men have had places where they can go be with other men to hang out or whatever, like whether that was, ancient Greece or like at a stag club or like a hunter's lodge or something, and they would just hang out with other men, smoke cigars, drink, and tell stories, whatever, share wisdom. And I think that in those have historically they've been broken up. Like there's basically like almost no spaces today where men can exclusively spend time together. And mostly it's because people on the outside, whether it's women or they're simps, have come in and broke it up. And so when I hear about these links between a powerful individual like a Vanderbilt and the Freemasons, it makes me wonder, are you trying to convince me subtly that there shouldn't be, these fraternities because men getting together in like a place is bad? Because that's not really, I'm not on board with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. It's just always interesting to consider why people mention these things. Like I say,
Yeah.
I think it's that in some of it, it is just that secret societies are interesting because they're secret. You don't know what goes on in them inside, and so it is subject to a bit of speculation.
Yeah.
But as I said, some of them do have an animating principle behind them, whereby they want to push stuff out, like the Rosicrucians. They very specifically had, no, this is our diet, this is our idea, this is what we're doing. I actually elaborate further on that in the full write-up, quoting from another book about it, which is in here as well. Let me double check the title.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, that book is actually Hegel and the Hermetic tradition. I actually read a few pages from that in the full write-up, explaining explaining what Rosicrucianism is and how and why you end up with that, the principle behind it, sort of what they aim to do and aim to achieve, and how that's quite an interesting thing. And it's interesting that obviously we've got into this talking about Sanger, Margaret Sanger. One of her lovers throughout her life was a sexologist by the name of Havelock Ellis, who was a Rosicrucian. And one of the reasons that she, and this is the Margaret Sanger who founded Planned Parenthood, by the way, who had quite a lot of money behind her, which I think was from the Rockefellers. But one of the main reasons that she started dabbling with Rosicrucianism along with this guy Havelock Ellis was in an attempt to channel the spirit of her deceased daughter, who had died a few months earlier from something, I don't remember what. But that was sort of one of the things that sort of started getting her interested in this part of the occult. So once again, you start seeing where this spiritualism, this like mediumship, new age woo starts coming in once again. You've got another woman here who's, she wants this, all this pro-abortion stuff as a means of, well, as I've indicated before, I actually think a lot of this is about removing material connection from people so that they can spiritually ascend, they can transcend, up their vibrational frequencies and move on to a higher spiritual plane to return to the oversoul. But that we've covered that enough before. That I actually think is why they're so big into the idea of abortion and removing people's
absolutely
materials desire.
Yeah, I was gonna mention I have this Jaff memo in front of me, and it's interesting because so they claim they want to reduce fertility. I'm going to mention this. They want to reduce fertility. That's the goal of Planned Parenthood. And because they want to reduce the population. Now, they'll say that it's because of the climate. And I know this is weird. It's like, what does climate have to do with, men and women? But it's about population reduction, which is working. Like all these things I'm telling you is happening. Like it's working. Okay, birth control pill, postpone. Like people are postponing marriage. These are the things, the initiatives that these folks with. It's not just Planned Parenthood, but all of the people working with them. So they have this chart, or this sort of like setup. It says proposed measures to reduce fertility by universality or selectivity of impact in the U.S. And they have social constraints, restructure the family. So get people to postpone or avoid marriage entirely, alter the image of an ideal family size. So basically like where, my grandmother, for example, had 9 children. My mother had 3 children. And like my brothers maybe have like 1 or 2. So you can, even just in my own personal life, I can see how drastically it's changed. um, encourage increased homosexuality, which I think is strange because I thought people were just born this way, but apparently it can be encouraged. So they make this a thing, okay? Educate children in a public education system, also include sex education for children, right? Put fertility control agents in the water supply. Now, I know that I don't know how true that is, but I do think when women use birth control and they like throw it in the garbage or like they toss things out, it gets into the water supply. That might be what it is. I don't know. Encourage women to join the workforce. This has already happened, right? Those are just the social constraints, and there's lots of other stuff. You reduce the or eliminate paid maternity leave. You eliminate children or family allowances. You you know, you eliminate welfare payments after the first two children so that people have fewer children, but they still can get welfare benefits, and so on. So there's all of these, and it makes you wonder, like, okay, why would Planned Parenthood give a shit about any of that? And it's because their ultimate goal is to reduce the number of people. And they'll say, if you corner them on it, they might say, oh, it's for the planet, but it's not affecting them. You know what I mean? Like, these people are having kids, they're starting families, but they're like they're like the elites. They believe they can, and you can't. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how the standards that these people ask for never apply to them. I mean, even just on the climate thing, there's the COP meeting, which is happening, and people have already noticed by the amount of private jets that are going in. It's like, hang on, you people in this one thing have already put out like more CO2 than like the poorest 2/3 of humanity put together.
Mm-hmm.
You don't believe a goddamn word that you're saying, because if you did, you'd do this by a Zoom meeting. We have the technology.
Yes. Allison just joined us, so she might not say anything. I don't know, but I just put her avatar on the screen, anyways.
Oh, okay. We can continue with the Sanger thing, because it's interesting that you actually mentioned some of the things regarding how they want children to be raised, because throughout this book, Wilson does actually document a few of the utopian compounds that a bunch of these feminist organizations or feminist people attempt to create. And almost all of them rely on things like communal raising of children, which you probably recognize. But it's something that comes up in a lot of these Christian communes. It also comes up in Jewish communes as well, like the kibbutz, where they start saying like, oh, we're going to raise children communally. People aren't going to know who their kids are, and everyone's going to pitch in.
I don't know if we're touching that.
Well, the thing is that is actually the reason why a lot of those things fell apart. The early forms of the kibbutz, that was one of the driving factors for why it fell apart, because basically the kids ended up really not having a very good time in there because of not knowing who their parents were. And Sanger, through this lover of hers, Ellis, he was a strange chap, to say the least. He married a woman who was a lesbian feminist. They would have an open relationship, obviously, as a result of this.
Like Destiny.
He definitely does a very wonderful thing for your mental health, as we're seeing. Oh, there we go. Hello, Allison.
Hi. No, I just had to come in with the, like Destiny, but Tish,
Yeah.
I'm just giving him a hard time.
Yeah. I shouldn't, because part of me feels sorry for him, but part of me is also like, you know what, you deserve your suffering, and maybe you'll come out of this a better person.
Yeah, don't when it says don't disturb the alligators, don't climb the fence, walk down the side of the slope, get into the water, and start poking the alligators with a stick.
Yeah.
Some things are really obvious what you shouldn't do, but apparently people still need to learn. And Destiny did. Man, yeah.
everyone
I'm
thinks
not actually aware of the Destiny Sigil. Like, I'm
so.
vaguely aware of it, and I honestly I don't really want to go into the
Yeah,
details because,
let's
frankly,
not go
it
into it.
sounds depressing, honestly. And
Yeah.
if it's as bad as I envision it based on what little I know, I don't particularly want to pile more crap on him because it sounds like it's going to be bad enough.
The short story is she asked for a lot of concessions. He offered all of the concessions, and then she went off with a man who basically demanded and gave her ultimatums and I guess according to Destiny, so take it with a grain of salt, acted like a sort of abusive, shall we say.
Yeah,
which,
that's
honestly,
Well,
it sounds like two abusers found each other, so the world is a better place. Anyway.
All right. Anyway, go ahead. Let's talk about Margaret Sanger and stuff.
Yeah. As I said, some people deserve their suffering, and they will make it. If they make it through, they will be a better and stronger person coming out the other side. And I suppose I can just say to Destiny, hey, we are here. There is a hand extended. You can come and hang out with a bunch of people who will help you make sense of everything and not judge you harshly for it, because you're only human and people make mistakes. Sometimes you have to learn, and sometimes that learning can be helped by other people. But we come back to what we said earlier, where it has to be your idea. Yeah, and I'm not going to press it because it might just push you further away. So get back onto Ellis, I suppose.
All I would say is that you would hope that, having learned from this, certain individuals would understand why we say that men need to avoid making those kinds of concessions, and that's all I'll say.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Havelock Ellis, he was the lover of Margaret Sanger. Like I said, he was a colourful character with his relationship to a lesbian woman in their open relationship. He allegedly suffered from lifelong impotence, and it wasn't until the age of 60 that he discovered the reliable cure for this unfortunate condition, and that was watching women urinate.
What?
Don't ask. That was apparently just what he was into. Because sure, why the hell not?
Well,
he would throughout his life, he would advocate that homosexuality was a natural and harmless thing, probably because he was married to a lesbian. He also co-authored a book, Sexual Inversion, with John Simmons, who was a noted proponent of homosexuality and pederasty, of all things, because of course. John Simmons, who was much like Havelock Ellis, would be married to a woman, but he would have homosexual affairs with men. Ellis would, throughout his life, study what you would now call transgenderism, but at the time he referred to it as aeonism, as opposed to transgenderism. He published a book, The Psychology of Sex, in which he would talk about and this is where things get kind of like, of course he did. He spoke about the masturbation practices of children as young as 3, and would claim that children, and this is a direct quote here, this is not from this book, because I had to look this all up by myself to verify, a quote from this book regarding children: they are capable of a wide range of genital and sexual aptitude. As my note here simply says, this is your daily reminder that progressives have been pushing the sex with children thing for over a century. This is not some the left has only just now gone too far thing.
Yeah.
But why?
We haven't gotten, well, do you know, Tilder? I mean, I was going to say we haven't gotten there yet, but...
Well, yes, it's under the... rubric that they want to go through. When you free people of the material constraints, everything becomes very, very spiritual. Everyone ends up on a completely level and equal playing field. So everyone becomes fair game because everyone is spiritually equal. And the idea is
the singularity.
Yeah, basically, it's you end up in this. That stuff ties to the concept of the Age of Aquarius, which is the idea that Christ has already been born again, except in an ethereal plane. As a result of that, the material world that we're in is actually basically secretly a lesser version of heaven. And if we therefore begin embodying effectively godly traits, you can turn this world into heaven.
You make heaven on earth, yeah.
Yes, and in so doing, you And in order to do that, you basically have to remove all constraints between people so that we can all become one as part of the oversoul in this heaven on earth. And this is why you get feminists and social justice minded people who say that necessarily under socialism, age of consent will lower or go away completely because you'll all be equal. It's just that they try to apply that to a materialist thing, whereas the actual origin of that idea is spiritual, and they don't want to acknowledge that.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure that that being more godly had more to do with controlling your sexual appetites and being a decent person, not having sex with children.
That's a suppression, Allison. I don't know what you're talking
about.
Yes.
Yes. According to their way of looking at it, that is actually. According to their way, that is the social construct. That anything like that is imposed. When you follow this New Age nonsense back to its most fundamental origin point, anything that is put on you as a constraint is necessarily a social construct, which means it's imposed by basically just the materialism of man, and therefore is just in the way of you being the spiritual, godly being that you actually are.
How will they continue to condemn Leonardo DiCaprio for having sex with 19-year-old women if they get rid of the age of consent and so we can have sex with children? I mean, there's this rank hypocrisy about all of this.
Yeah, they don't care.
And
we're still talking about Leonardo DiCaprio didn't exist in Margaret Sanger's time. So
yeah, I know. I'm just thinking about the people who've inherited this, and continue this.
Actually, Teal, this reminds me of something that I want to mention, because you were talking about the inner in the video. You mentioned this concept that I was talking about like a while back, which is like how these kind of like culty Gnostic things work. So you have like the I think it was in Maoism, they called it the outer school, and the outer school, there's like 3 rings: the outer school, the inner school, and the inner circle, right? I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I think that's right. And the outer school is basically like most of the social justice types that we see around us. The people, the college students, the YouTubers, the people on Twitter, the media figures, even most of the instructors and college professors and people in education and activism. They do it because they want to belong to something greater than themselves, and so they find that it is important and special, and it makes them feel good about themselves. This is what most people that are in this cult, the way that they think. And then you have the inner school, who are the people who have read the material, they understand, more of what the goals of some of the thinkers and the people who write about this stuff are after. So they know that, like, Margaret Sanger started Planned Parenthood. They know that, that she and the people that work in this, they had, specific goals about essentially freeing women from the burden of children and whatnot. But they may not know, like the really, really like culty religious roots of these things. But they just have a better understanding of the history and of the theories. And then you have the inner circle, which are the people who really know what's going on. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's what we're talking about too, right? Like Margaret Sanger is probably, I don't know, she's either inner school or inner circle. I think inner circle actually, but
yeah, the people who actually sort of talk about the spiritual side of that stuff, they are a lot more insight. The people who you deal with, the rank and file, which is like the 90% of them or something like that, they're the people who, if you say you're making a bunch of spiritualist claims here, they're just like, no, I'm not. Go read a book, educate yourself. And then you slam down this pile of books and you're like, well, I've read all of these. Look at all my post-it notes that are sticking out of this. This is your religion. I have literally read more about your belief system than you have, and they'll still deny it anyway. We can talk very specifically, I suppose, about the New Age woo bit here,
sure,
because you sort of really get into the modern occult side of things in chapter 8, and that's where she starts talking about occultism proper, and that's where you really hit some of the more hermetic and theosophical things. And I've got quite a lot of expansion on that regarding the New Age concepts, because
let's do it.
you start really hitting the bizarre indigo children and star seeds nonsense, and all of this stuff does tie into feminism as much as they would like to deny it, because feminism is heavily linked to the New Age movement.
Mm-hmm.
So chapter 8 here, my write-up, I've got I think just 4 or 5 paragraphs. I guess my voice will survive. That's only one way to find out. Let's go.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Chapter 8 begins with talking about English occultist Aleister Crowley, founder of Thelema, spiritualist practice that worships the Scarlet Woman Babylon, the sacred whore. Crowley was heavily inspired by the works of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, of which he was a member before moving on to found Thelema. Consistent with Hermetic and Theosophical beliefs, this is our important tie-in there, Thelema drew heavily on ancient Egyptian religious icons. In this instance, the belief of Babylon and how she must become incarnated as a means of overthrowing the patriarchal god Osiris to usher in the Age of Horus. This is why I mention in Theosophy all of the Egyptian tie-ins that they have, because this is where it comes from. So Crowley believed that he would be the beast that the Scarlet Woman must ride in upon to enter the world, which predictably led him to the bizarre practices of sex magic that he would engage in.
Right, so he basically got laid by lots of women because he was trying to find the chosen one.
Yeah.
That's a new level of riz that I never did not see. That's don't take notes, guys. It's a good way to get AIDS, but go ahead.
And he was the top man in his society, and all of the girls wanted him, not anyone else. Funny how that works. Anyway, so Crowley had several followers. There are 2 names that stick out as famous people you will know. That's L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons. Mm-hmm. Jack Parsons was a NASA scientist who would eventually die working on jet propulsion. However, during his life, he would meet a woman named Marjorie Cameron, whom he considered to be the embodiment of the modern occult feminist woman. Parsons had planned on using her to conceive a child that he thought would become the Antichrist. However, Marjorie would abort a pregnancy without telling Parsons. Although they were married in the same year they met, they would continue having affairs.
Weird. They foiled by their own plot.
Yes, hoisted by their own petard, unfortunately. I guess Planned Parenthood did some good after all.
Stop the Antichrist.
So after Parsons' untimely death, Marjorie Cameron would move to California and set up an occult society that would practice ritual sex magic as a means of incarnating so-called moon children and to contact the spirit of her late husband. Again, we're seeing all of these interesting parallels between why these people do these things. So the author, unfortunately, here misses key details about Cameron, which I will provide here. These rituals included self-harm and the alleged presence of UFOs as a sign of the effectiveness of the rituals. She would also hold catastrophic views about the end of the world, so she was an immanentist, and she believed that the end of the world will be brought about by a race war from which she believed she would be rescued by a flying saucer. The UFO link will become relevant shortly. Moon children are supposedly spiritually attuned children aligned with the moon, which is the female heavenly body compared to the male sun. This is where we can talk about the importance of the solar and lunar traditions and cycles from antiquity. This is covered in extensive details in the writings of Evola, whom I've spoken about before over the years, as well as mentioning the storytelling methods of the Olympian and Titanic cycles, which I've mentioned before but not covered in extensive detail. This is something that may be done in the future, but this is not the time or place. The importance of the lunar tradition and lunar cycle is that it is a weaker reflection of the solar masculine cycle, the solar representing a pole of strength, stability, centrality, and a spiritual core dominated by masculine principles, the lunar representing female principles of meekness, chaos, and materialism. This is part of where the female spiritualism moon connection hails from. You can read more about this in things like The Mystery of the Grail and Revolt Against the Modern World, which is not the book that you should start with, but it's one that covers it in fair detail. To this, I would like to add in the New Age concept of star seeds and indigo children, which the author does not mention, but this bears explanation because of the similarity in concept and the importance that they hold for L. Ron Hubbard and his UFO alien-based faith of Scientology. Indigo children are a New Age child that is more spiritually aware and in tune than normal people and manifests psychic abilities such as telepathy. The concept of indigo children was created by Nancy Ann Tapp and formalized in her book Your Life Through Color. which is a New Age tome mentioning auras and their colors and the significance of these colors. Hence, indigo children. It's very complicated, I'm sure you can see.
Yeah.
So, star seeds are a New Age belief that some people are actually aliens, either by birth or having an alien spirit attached to them during an out-of-body experience. Star seeds are usually considered teachers who will claim to be passing on alien knowledge to people via telepathy, out-of-body experiences, and channeled writing. You can see right there immediately the connections to spiritualism, because it's the exact same thing, just updated for a new era. Rather than talking to the spirits of the dead or spirits or manifestations of some god or something like that, now it's aliens, but it's the exact same thing. So the concepts of indigo children and star seeds are important to the New Age religion because it's a means of indoctrination. You don't find out you're one of them unless somebody already in the cult tells you that you are one. It is to lure people into the New Age faith. You're probably realizing the connections to Scientology here and the Gnostic portions of hidden knowledge and understanding. The Scientology angle is the concept of the alien Xenu and his destruction of a planet, resulting in Thetans flying to Earth and attaching themselves to people. Of course, you need to join Scientology and give them all your money and possessions to clear these Thetans so that you can become a fully spiritually realized person.
Yeah.
So while we talk about this, remember our last book, Women's Reality, and the dualism mentioned, the ongoing forever process and levels of capital T truth. There is a direct through line in all of these topics stemming from the Gnostic tradition radiating out via Hermetica and Theosophy. This is why feminism is so heavily intertwined with the New Age movement, neo-paganism, and witchcraft. The spiritually centered divine female channeling their gnosis, their hidden knowledge, to tell you the real her story of the world, to overthrow the patriarchal so-called objective world, to help people realize the capital T truth of the divine feminine, so we can engage in the process of becoming, to free ourselves from the oppressive material world, to become enlightened, changing our vibrational frequencies, ushering in the new age, and becoming one with God, with Source, the Oversoul, etc. All enabled by allowing that female system free-flowing exchange of energy from solar plexus to solar plexus, so that we can destroy oppressive white male so-called objective social constructs and objective defined categories such as race and gender, and yes, even age and linear time, because remember, that's what Schaefer was writing about, time being a social construct, yo. And we destroy all of this, and we transcend to become one, free of all distinction and difference as part of the one truth of itself. A reminder here, this is literally quoting university course level women's studies literature.
Yeah. And there's no shame, they don't hide it, it's all out there. They really believe it. So it's almost like, we could say this sounds all ridiculous, but if they believe it and they are acting on that belief, then it is kind of real in terms of the impacts, right? So I mean, yeah, that's Alice, do you have any questions or anything? I know that you said that you were just going to listen, but no, it's a lot. Okay, well,
I'm just enjoying listening.
Okay, all right.
I mean, I can tie all of that stuff to the UN if people would like by reading the bit about chapter 6.
This keeps the rabbit hole goes pretty deep. I think the UN and
some of this is, to be fair, covering stuff that we've already covered. So it'll be easier to get into. I think if I do the chapter 6 reading, though, someone else will have to talk for a while.
Okay,
that's all I can say. We'll just plow through this bit because it is interesting and it ties that together. Because we've gone heavy into the New Age stuff. I do think we need to tie that a little bit more to the feminist stuff because I think there's still maybe a bit of a gap for some people here.
So you mentioned, I just want to say, you mentioned Aleister Crowley. I believe that there was some, what was his name? Timothy McVeigh. I think he's a Satanist too, right? Or something. I think he was also, I don't know if he's in Rachel's book, but I saw something about him being connected to the feminist movement as well. And Timothy McVeigh, and I guess what I'm wondering about is, because there is a lot of this kind of Luciferian stuff like mixed in with Scientology and all these other crazy cults, but it's all like, hinged on this concept of women's lib, which is how they kind of like let loose all these things, even though they legitimately believe this. Is it then really all that crazy to say that abortion is child sacrifice? Like, I mean, they engaged in child sacrifice. They were doing that. But like now they can do it through through Planned Parenthood. Is that not what's happening? Like either they're sacrificing children via abortion, and I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that this is probably what they think, or they are grooming children for, sexual usage or transgenderism or something like that. Because it does seem to be happening. Okay, go ahead.
If you wanted to go through things like Kabbalah, which we've mentioned, because it is also tied to this into Theosophy, Kabbalah is part of it. Well, there are. I suppose you could say this is perhaps more a Christian interpretation of some of the Jewish occult that you find in Akala, but you can make connections between things like Moloch and Satan. And Moloch is one of the gods that did have child sacrifice to it in that tradition. So if you wanted to see it that way, you could. Obviously, it requires you to believe in these gods and that these things are effective. But
but I guess I'm saying it's not that I believe it; it's that if they believe it, they're acting on it either way. So I'm wondering, like, I'm basically saying that if they may, Moloch may be real or may not be real, but that doesn't really matter. The point is that there is this going on, like, there. And it makes you, I mean, I think it is. I don't know. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Anton LaVey, that's what I was thinking about, not Timothy McVeigh. Anton LaVey was what I was thinking about. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it is one of those things that if people believe, well, it's also, again, I think we come back once again to inner and outer circle stuff. Like, if you dig far enough into this, you could totally do the Kabbalist, Lucifer is Moloch and Moloch is child sacrifice, and you people are engaging in the New Age thing, and because there is a tie there, and as a result of this, that by engaging in this, that you could do this. But I think that in order to find people who actually genuinely believe that they are pushing abortion as a means of feeding baby souls to Moloch, I think there are very few people who genuinely believe that. Like, you can find some, but I think for the most part, you are dealing with like the 99.9% outer circle people who don't know that any of this has informed the tradition of it. And also we have to again consider it's so many like centuries removed from it. Again, like as we mentioned at the beginning, like if you follow the scientific method back far enough, you end up at Christianity, but no one would say that being a scientist makes you a Christian. And I think that this sort of follows a similar thing. Like, abortion is so far removed from some of this occult stuff, to say that abortion is an occult act by itself, it becomes kind of meaningless for most people because it's so far removed. But there is that single thread of it that ties it together. But for like most people, that thread is irrelevant. They don't even know that it's there.
Yeah, I think so too. But I guess like if I was in a crazy cult and I was like, Margaret Sanger, and I wanted to sacrifice children to Baphomet or whoever it is, I would start an organization, call it something else, and then after I'm dead and gone, everybody just keeps on carrying on with the rituals that I started. I don't know. It's just something to think about. But we're going into the weeds. We should get into the chapter.
Oh, I think this is exactly what we're here to discuss with the occult side of feminism. We're discussing feminism and the occult. Let's discuss feminism and the occult. Let's go nuts. Why not?
Yeah. Well, so, go ahead.
Yeah, so chapter 6, So we're going back in time a little bit in the book, but this, I think, will bridge some of the gaps of what we spoke about earlier to what we just spoke about with New Ageism. Tie the two together, why the hell not? This is why I wrote this thing in this order, but so screw order, let's go. There is no underlying order to my universe. I reject your reality and substitute my own. Chapter 6 introduces us to theosophy. This is something we've mentioned before and we'll cover in coming write-ups. Here, however, I would like to address something from Rachel Wilson's perspective, and that seems to be something others, usually in the area of traditional conservative politics, observe as well. In this chapter, she points out that theosophy offered a rejection of the patriarchy of Christianity. This in itself plays into the feminist ideal of society at some point having been a patriarchy. This objection may come as to how the term patriarchy is used, but society was never patriarchal. For religious and right-wing types to use this term to refer to societal order inherently submits to feminist dogma. Even in times where official authority rested with men, there was still ample female power in society, and men who ruled would often only do so with the blessing of enough of that society's women. I actually still have a note here, a legacy note in this write-up that says HBR only, discuss. Just if anyone wanted to jump in there for anything.
I think Allison unmuted, so she wants to get in there.
No, I just wanted to point something out. A couple days ago, I learned that, well, the electoral process in England, first of all, it was a lot more interesting in the past than it is now, I suppose. But when they had open ballots, the ridings, I know it probably has a UK specific word like Birkin Wiccan something or other, but the potential candidates for a political position would take part in what they would call, I think, the hustings. And so they would have a gathering in like a town center, and I guess they would talk about the policies and what they intended to do. And people would vote, or the men who were franchised at the time would vote publicly. So everything was done publicly. But what was interesting is that the men who didn't have a vote, and also the women, would take part in the process, and they would engage in something called looking on, which would be jeering or cheering for particular candidates. Who knows, maybe even questioning them. So women were involved in the political process in the past. Do we know if those women felt like they were sufficiently heard during these hustings that they didn't agitate for a vote, or if they felt disenfranchised? We don't know, because they didn't really write much down about it or their own opinions on it. However, they were involved in the process, and it was a public thing. So they could jeer. If a man voted for something women didn't want, they could jeer him, and they would know publicly who he was, right? So they exerted a certain amount, obviously, of social pressure on the electoral process when the vote was public and it was a part of a process that the whole community came out for and was involved in. And we don't even recognize that anymore as part of the whole thing. Like that women's social influence had a big effect on the electoral process. Now, when the vote became private, that changed, but almost immediately after that, we started to see the agitation for women to have their own vote. And it's like, if we look at this more as like almost like a continuous thing, that women have always had a considerable influence on politics and the social sphere. And I think it's obvious that they did, since women's position in most societies throughout human history, they had that power. They were able to do things. I mean, look at Helena Troy, or the Viking women who, beat on their breasts to get their men to go wreak revenge against people who had wronged them. And that's part of human history, right? And they've had this power. And maybe where we see the disenfranchisement is where we're not actually looking close enough, or we're ignoring things that don't seem relevant to us. And because they have always had this power, when situations like the vote becoming private and hidden, taking away that social power they had to put on pressure on people and how they voted, then they start, you start to see the agitation for women to have the vote themselves. So it's almost like there's always this expectation that women have a significant say in the political and social processes of their cultures. And when one avenue closes it down for whatever reason, then something else opens up to give them that say. And so, yeah, like this whole construct of as society as a patriarchy in the past is wrong. I mean, I just recently on Twitter saw a conservative, since we're calling out conservatives now, seems to be fine with the whole concept of toxic masculinity because, we want to get, men are aggressive, and in the conservative parlance, men are aggressive and less moral than women. So we want to be able to call out those men who are bad. Well, first of all, that's a gross misunderstanding of what's really meant by toxic masculinity. And also, it's like, are you honestly saying that men are more immoral than women? Then don't you see how you are undermining your own conservative beliefs? Because how can men be the moral head of the family if they're less moral than women? And so it's like this thing that conservatives do, that they buy into feminist frameworks, or there are feminist frameworks that really just come right out of conservative conceits about men and women, and it just undermines their entire social institution. They are really almost like destiny. They're just walking into their own traps.
Well, I think conservatives are feminists. I think they're just behind.
But even more, it's like feminists took off on certain conservative conceits in the past, like the angel in the house, and women are more moral than men, or women's wrongs are somehow less. The things that women do is somehow less harmful than what men do, right? And they feminism sort of built on that and created this whole other corpus of women's ways of knowing and mysterious spiritual powers and other stuff like that. Women's gnosis. All right, that's what I want to say. I don't know if that was helpful at all. But yeah, I see how conservatives end up just buying into this stuff, how they undermine their own arguments, especially with the patriarchy thing. And how it's really destructive. And I'll get off the podium here and just let you guys take it from there.
Aggression is good and should not be condemned. Right.
Well, I would argue that aggression isn't something that's uniquely male.
It's not, and it's also a good thing because that is the authority from which everything else derives.
I understood that reference.
Courage is the most... Yes, but it is true because courage is the most important of the things that you can possess, and courage also requires violence to be able to uphold it. And if you lack either of those things, then you cannot achieve anything, and you will live your life as a slave. Anyway, so continuing with the book, we learn of Mabel Collins. She was an adept of Blavatsky who co-authored with her the journal titled Lucifer. Why they chose this name, who knows? I'm sure it's just a coincidence. And this contained many articles on the esoteric, occult, Kabbalah, astrology, and feminism. After a falling out between the two, Collins would suggest Blavatsky had begged her to state that her writings were divinely written by Blavatsky's various spirit mentors. In return, Blavatsky accused Collins of having numerous affairs with members of her order and practicing sexual tantric black magics. My note here is it's fascinating that such modern, progressive, free-love women would resort to calling each other slut. How things never change. As a result of this dispute, Collins withdrew from public life due to a mental breakdown. She and her 46 books are lauded by feminists to this day. We are also now introduced to Florence Farr, New Age woman extraordinaire, a West End actress in London who had numerous affairs, because of course she did, including with George Bernard Shaw and W.B. Yeats. Yeats should be noted as a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which he initiated Farr into in 1890. Farr climbed high in the ranks of the Golden Dawn because of her alleged ability to summon the Egyptian god Taptharath. Farr would leave the Golden Dawn in 1902 and write numerous articles on women's liberation and ancient Egyptian religion in the journal The New Age. Just another coincidence, I'm sure. In 1907, she would write about how prostitution should not only be legal, but be seen as sacred. Most interestingly, the author of this book notes her stance as being anti-Christian, but doesn't comment on Farr's position, including the possible interpretation that Christianity is anti-white. And this is based on some of Farr's writing regarding the Semites and the debt that they have incurred by taking over white nations with their religion. Which is not exactly an uncommon position at the time, but these days I think we recognize it for what it is. So the author then next mentions Annie Besant, who we mentioned before. She was one of Helena Blavatsky's proteges. Besant had a poor relationship with her husband, whoever would have guessed. He was an Anglican vicar, and she was a Catholic, which of course sounds like the setup for a wonderful and amusing sitcom. This theological difference resulted in problems for their marriage. Besant would take to writing books and articles which earned her a modest sum. She would come to be unhappy with her husband having control of the family finances, with her belief being that her money should be hers, and his should belong to the family. Read, hers by proxy. This is interesting in light of what was written by Anne Wilson Schaef in Women's Reality, claiming women just know what is theirs in relationships and never overreach for money or property, especially in the event of divorce. Besant did, of course, divorce her husband, what a surprise, and would work writing for the National Secular Society in England, covering topics such as birth control, secularism, socialism, and feminism. Again, all of these same topics just keep coming up all together. Really weird how that happens. Shortly after this would be her meeting with Helena Blavatsky and eventual conversion to Theosophy, after which she would serve as co-editor for the magazine Lucifer. After numerous trips to India, which she believed to be her true home, she would also join the International Order of Freemasonry for Men and Women, Le Droit Humain, seeing it as a natural extension of her occult beliefs. Besant also had a friend, C.W. Ledbetter, who was removed from the Theosophy Society after teaching its pubertal male members about masturbation and committing sex acts with them. Daily reminder, this is not new. Besant remained friends with Ledbetter despite this, which is important because in later years Ledbetter would find Jiddu Krishnamurti, a 12-year-old boy in India that he believed would be a world teacher and a vehicle for the spirit of Lord Maitreya that would help evolve humanity into a higher spiritual being. Same themes coming up again. Besant adopted the boy, and together with Ledbetter began grooming him for his spiritual role. The term grooming I have used here deliberately for specifically reference more than one context. To give you an idea about what exactly I'm getting at here, Krishnamurti later on in his life, when interviewed about this after he became disillusioned with Theosophy, would only ever refer to Ledbetter by the word evil and refuse to talk about him any further. However, during the time Krishnamurti was being groomed for his future, Besant and Ledbetter would also go on to found another publishing company, the Star Publishing Trust. Oh, what a surprise, these people again just have all of this money, all of this funding to put out all of these publishing companies. Fascinating, isn't it? So on page 77, we're introduced to Alice Bailey, a woman frequently referred to as the mother of the New Age movement. Like many others, Bailey has a lengthy history, including divorce and discovery of Theosophy. She and her second husband, interesting how it's the second again, a Freemason and National Secretary of the Theosophy Society by the name of Foster Bailey. He would go on to found the Lucifer Publishing Company. That would go on to be renamed the Lucis Publishing Company, specifically to avoid confusion with Blavatsky's journal Lucifer. Bailey was a prolific writer, creating 24 books that she claims were written with spiritually channeled guidance. These books are not feminist in the strictest sense, but are more focused on the occult and New Age spiritualism. Several of her books mention the need for a one-world government and one-world religion. It was this belief of hers as exemplified in her book, Esoteric Astrology. This is my note here, not from Occult Feminism, because I've expanded on this, in which Bailey wrote, so this is Bailey writing in her book, Arguing as one ever must for the universal to the particular, it is essential that humanity relates its own mechanism to the greater mechanism through which the planetary life, capital L life, functions, and views his soul as an infinitesimal part of the world soul. It is necessary for him, therefore, to relate his soul to his personality, viewing both as aspects and integral parts of the human family. This will be increasingly the case. This process is beginning to demonstrate in the steadily expanding group national and racial consciousness which humanity is today demonstrating. A consciousness which shows a spiritual inclusiveness, or as an abnormal and wicked attempt from the standpoint of the soul to fuse and blend all nations into a world order based on material issues and dominated by a material vision. Isn't that all just fascinating, given everything that we've spoken about here?
Yeah.
Yeah, just view your soul as an infinitesimally small part of a greater world soul, almost like an oversoul, a Gaia sort of thing. Because we're all part of one thing, remember?
Yeah.
Reality is just a social construct, Joe. So notice the use of the term world soul, and remember back to conversations concerning Hegel and the concept of Weltgeist. You can see the through line from Hegel's sublation of the dialectic and how the spirit is the animating principle of the transformation, the becoming of the dialectic. You should also notice the concept of racial consciousness and how this ties into modern intersectionalist and feminist conversations and framing around the topic of critical race theory and the need for people to raise racial consciousness, which once again ties back to Hegel and the Volksgeist, which from a Hegel dictionary by Inwood, Hegel held represented national peculiarity and the primitive or primordial of a people, that a people has a distinctive character or spirit, in part inherent to them, but also in part due to historical circumstance and natural environment. Covering some previous conversation and presentation, this is why critical race theorists and other feminists, intersectionalists, gender scholars, etc., will have capital B black and capital T trans identities. They believe in an inherent similarity to these people by virtue of being, and also by shared environments and historical circumstance. This may go on to explain how you get some people making silly observations such as being racist towards Muslims. Muslim is of course a name given to the followers of Islam, not a race or an observable genetic admixture of allele frequencies. However, under the framework of the Hegelian Volksgeist, a race can be in effect created by enough shared historical circumstance and environment leading to a shared spirit. Or the racist towards Muslims is just an assertion because most Muslims are brown and they think you just hate brown people and use Islam as a proxy. Once again, inner circle versus outer circle understanding. However, it was this belief of Bailey's that would influence her later decision to become involved with the United Nations, and her founding of the United Nations non-governmental organization UN Goodwill, and may have been influential in the spiritual caucus at the United Nations, which is a real thing, even though it may sound like it is not. It had its annual meetings on October the 19th and November 16th of this year. You can go and look those up if you'd like to. You can also read about the UN Spiritual Caucus at spiritualcaucusun.org. This website contains links to everything you would expect: the Global Eco Village Project, Gaia Education, Operation Peace Through Unity, and Cosmos Associates. It's also the standard New Age, hippy-dippy sort of organizations, the kind of things that continue to exist despite the fact that they're being run by perpetually broke hippies. This is because they're being funded by the UN. Unfortunately, this belief of hers and influence over these organizations has unfortunately given rise to actual conspiracy theories about the New World Order, which do posit things which are untrue, such as the use of NASA technology to influence people and usher in the New Age. However, there is obvious truth to the idea that the United Nations does push for greater globalization efforts, freer exchanges of ideas, movements of people, trade, and the UN is influential in informing government policy and economic projects around the world via its various NGOs. These are literally described on their various websites and pamphlets. It is not a conspiracy theory to suggest that organizations do the things they are telling you they are doing.
Yep.
And that's chapter 6 for you, my review of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's that makes a lot of sense. It's like we see the same, it's the same patterns. I'm glad that you are linking this to the sort of like all the other intersections of intersectionality. It shows how it's essentially the same talking points. But you mentioned, okay, UN Goodwill. I mean, would it be fair to assume that UN Women is a part of this too?
Well, UN Women exists, so it's part of the United Nations, so it'll fall
Well, yeah,
under the
for
same
sure.
umbrella. So yes.
Yeah. Okay.
You've also got to remember that UN Goodwill has a bunch of. It's that thing that they've got like a bunch of ambassadors and people who travel all out and about the place and ingratiate themselves with local societies and attempt to bring them around to their way of thinking. Not that I've just defined Rosicrucians there, I'm totally talking about something completely different that has no sort of link to them at all in any way whatsoever. Yeah, it's definitely nothing there. But a lot of the UN ambassadors and the advocates that you find at Goodwill, a lot of them are the fairly typical rank and file feminist of the upper crust of society that you would expect. I think what's her name was one of them, the Harry Potter actress, woman, girl thing.
You're talking about why am I not remembering her name? She played Hermione, right?
Yes, I can't remember her name either.
Emma Watson.
Yeah, I think she was a Goodwill ambassador. I think, but I'm not sure.
You know what? I think you might be right.
Either that or she just spoke. I know she's spoken at the UN a couple of times. I'm not 100%.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not 100% on whether she is actually an ambassador for Goodwill or not, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. It was a he for she. She was the he for she person.
So. Yes. Which I think was also something. Was that tied to the UN? I think it was.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. No, it was. It was. He for she was a UN thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
absolutely.
There you go.
In fact, Emma Watson being an actress, like Hollywood in general, essentially lionizes the United Nations as a very like credible, not just like an organization, but like an authority. They treat it like it should be revered more than our governments are, even though the UN doesn't do anything except basically talk and try to like move the needle politically. They lobby, they do that kind of thing. They're donors, but they don't have political power. They're not supposed to. It just sounds really legit,
Yeah.
But
okay. It is really weird that people say like, oh, the UN doesn't have any power or anything like this. Okay, well, what do they do then? What do all of these world leaders who get together in one place do, if absolutely nothing at all, because it doesn't matter?
I mean, it's a good question, but I think they definitely essentially they exercise top-down control when they're able. They basically go and they lobby people who actually get elected, and they get those people to do things that nobody voted for. And that's how the UN, I think, operates. I don't know how much pull they have, but I know that it's undue. They have a tremendous amount of legitimacy in government, as well as on, in our media space, on the internet, etc. If the UN complains about something on Twitter, people just assume they must have something legitimate, some legitimate grievance. It's very similar to like the ADL and the SPLC, in fact.
Yeah. They also fund a whole bunch of NGOs that, do things that, governments just really seem to kind of like,
Yeah, well,
it's weird how that happens. All these NGOs, they're definitely not, they are non-governmental organizations, so it's definitely not the government. It just so happens that they get funded by the government. Either that or they're involved in trading and have members of their governments on their boards, and they frequently make a lot of money via, doing things like stock investments or whatnot, which of course politicians know nothing about and definitely have no sort of knowledge regarding laws and legislation that might allow you to make excellently timed trades. That never happens, does it, Miss Pelosi?
Yep.
Etc.
It's funny you should mention that the NGOs, because we have been targeted by NGOs
I saw that and it was
Oh, okay.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Can we put up the big banner that just says Teal Deer was right again? You know, when I mentioned boy, I wonder why they got rid of all of the really reasonable people. You know, why did they get rid of like the Warren Farrells, the Tom Goldens, the Paul Elams, the
Mm-hmm.
Janice Fiamengas? You know, why did they get rid of and suppress all of those people? Yet rocket up all of the bottom of the barrel, this stupid bitch podcasts that are literally the worst representations of the red pill stuff. Almost like they wanted to make all of these ideas look as bad as possible so that they could point to them and use those to smear all of the reasonable people. Oh, look at this NGO document that did exactly that. Wow, what a coincidence. I never saw this coming. Because, you know, the organizations like YouTube and Google, they're definitely not playing a long con with their algorithms or anything. Mm-hmm. Doesn't happen. Conspiracy theories. Go back to sleep.
This is something relevant to what we were talking about yesterday, isn't it?
Yeah, it is what we were talking about yesterday. We're just bringing it up in passing because he was talking about the United Nations. And so we're talking about essentially like, no matter what thread you follow, it leads back around to stuff we're dealing with right now. So, of course, the United Nations, if you look into the background, there's a reason why, you know, these NGOs are coming after people like us. Because I think that, you know, like I said yesterday, I think there's no larger threat to all of this stuff than a self-actualized man. And so they can't allow that. That's the most dangerous thing to them. To their power, is what I'm saying.
And also women who talk about this stuff, apparently.
Yes. And also women who talk about it. Because people will listen to women.
Yeah, no, it's just it has been interesting to see all of the threads. And the fact that it isn't really a conspiracy theory. We now have the evidence that this is happening.
Yeah, people seem to have forgotten that the word conspiracy can exist in isolation, and it means a group of people arranging to do something, ideally without other people noticing. And it does happen.
Yep. Well, I mean,
even the phrase conspiracy theory isn't a lie. If you have a theory that there is a conspiracy going on,
they aren't doing a hell of a lot to hide it, really. I mean, I guess it would have remained hidden if Musk hadn't purchased Twitter and then just dismembered it and threw all the parts into the public eye. Maybe not all of them, but enough to start confirming people's suspicions that they had all along. I don't know. I know there's varied opinions on Musk and what he's doing, but it definitely has been.
I'm kind of on the you know, everyone is discovering these things at their own pace, and either they're going to be honest with themselves and, you know, be a part of bringing forth the truth, or they're going to hide from it. And we can't, you know, it's like the Destiny thing. Like, Destiny's either going to figure out that actually polyamory doesn't work, especially for men, or he's going to double down, and hopefully he doesn't. And I think the same thing with Elon Musk. Either he's going to be like, you know what, you know, I want to do the right thing. I don't care about like whether or not I make money or whatever, and I'm going to do that, or he's going to be a coward like most people. And I'm not saying that he will, but I think that most people are pretty morally cowardly about it, and I don't blame them. I understand it's scary stuff. So I'm hoping that Musk will come around.
Oh, what? Sorry, I didn't mean to cough right into the mic.
Oh, I thought you were laughing at me. No, it's okay.
No, I'm sorry.
It's okay. You were coughing.
I
think we all have messed up throats today.
We did put out that video in which he explicitly said that he's, you know, screw the advertisers.
Yeah, go fuck yourself.
Decide to destroy Twitter, then he's just going to make everything public.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean that's, you know, that like I said, I commend that. I think that's pretty based. But okay, So we've been going for about 2 hours and 15 minutes. I don't know if we've even scratched the surface. I would definitely say watch Teal Deer's video. I put a link to it in the description. And if you want to check out Rachel Wilson's book, you can get a physical copy or an audio book. I don't think that there is a Kindle version or PDF yet. So try to get your hands on it if you're interested. I think it's would you recommend it generally, even if there's like stuff that you would do differently?
Yeah, as I said in the introduction of the write-up, yes, for the most part, I would recommend it. You do have to be aware that we haven't really touched on the author's very obvious Orthodox Christian bias. We were kind of sort of skirted around it because it's not really worth getting into theological shit flinging over it.
Yeah, and it's not super relevant, but it is something you have to know is going to be there.
Yeah, like be aware that you do get parts of this book which are very heavily influenced by this, especially her misunderstandings around paganism. You will have Bible verses quoted at you in a couple of cases, unfortunately. And you will get slightly silly things like instead of talking about like an actual point of, say, Luciferian links of the occult, instead just beelining into here's a Bible verse and here's why the Satanic Church is bad and it's because of the heartbeat bill in Texas. It's like, okay, right, just stop. Don't do that. But she did. There are bits like that where you will definitely feel like you're being preached at. If you can ignore those bits, then the rest of it, I think, is definitely worth it. That stuff is the minority of what is in the book. It gives you a good timeline of events and a good timeline of some of the players that are involved in this. And that stuff is what is necessary. That stuff, I think, is key. If you can... there's a lot to chew on, but there's a lot of the Orthodox Christian bones that you need to spit out, unfortunately, because they are. Well, I guess it comes to your opinion on Christianity. If you agree with it, you'll take it on board and think, yeah, this is great. If you're like me, you'll just be like, oh, please stop. You're making it very hard to keep you in the 51% category.
Yeah. All right. So, okay, well, we should close it out because normally when the streams go this long, we don't get as much retention. So, I will say, I don't know if there's any like final things you want to make sure to get out there, or if or what.
Oh,
well, let me ask you this, okay? Yeah. So you've read this book, you did a video review on it, but this is just one on a journey that's gonna involve more. So what's the next thing you're gonna be looking at and talking about?
Okay, so yeah, we've got a stack of things. So we've done Anne Wilson Schaef's Women's Reality. That was book number 1. Occult Feminism. This one was not actually on the reading list, but it was something that was mentioned to me in a comment under the Women's Reality video, and someone was like, hey, someone's done something like this. It's called this book. You might want to go and look at it. And sure. I looked at it. And so I read it. So to the person who mentioned this to me, I am grateful to them that made it into the list, even though it is far and away, I'm going to say, the weakest book in the stack that I'm going through, but I'm still happy that it exists because, like I said, it's given me a few more leads to go into. So the next book is the one which I fanboy over a little bit occasionally, which is Radical Spirits by Anne Browd. That one is, I'm going to say, one of the better ones in the stack, which it bloody well should be, given that it's written by someone who is actually a researcher and lecturer at Harvard Divinity. So I should hope that that's a very well-written one. So that's the next one that we're going through. Hang on, I'm going to get the stack. Right. So, okay. Right. So we've got Radical Spirits. That's the next one that we're going to go through by Anne Brown. That's going to be book 3 on the list. Book 4 on the list will be American Feminism and the Birth of New Age Spirituality. That one's by Catherine Tumner. After that, we'll do Divine Feminine, which is Theosophy and Feminism in England by Joy Dixon. We will then cover The Key to Theosophy by Helena Blavatsky, which is kind of a thin one. It's the Q&A. How the hell do you explain theosophy to someone who has no idea what the hell it is? I do have a copy of The Secret Doctrine, which is also by Helena Blavatsky. This is like 700 pages of everything to do with theosophy, which I don't know if I'll do a video on because it'll be really, really lengthy. Side books to that, which I'm also going to cover, hopefully. We've got the Luciferian Feminism book, whose author I cannot remember. Let me look it up. Yep, Satanic Feminism, which is by Per Faxneld. That's one which is on the reading list, and that one is specifically about the Luciferian side of Satanism.
Yeah.
Per Faxneld actually believed that Lucifer would be the liberator of women because he rebelled against God and perceived that women needed to rebel against God to break the natural order of things. So I want to go through that one. There's also, for a little bit more side reading, another book which I've mentioned, which I quoted from in the full write-up of this, Hegel and the Hermetic. Yes, Hegel and the Hermetic Tradition. That's by Glenn McGee. That one is obviously talking about Hegel and how his works went on to inspire the things in Hermetica, which is part of the Gnostic tradition. I've got a few other side books as well, which I'm more there for reference and a little bit of fun. Like I've got the Hegel Dictionary by Inwood, which I referenced actually on this podcast earlier, which is just, it's a dictionary of terms that Hegel uses just for odd words that he uses and phrases, so that you've got sort of a few paragraphs that just expand on what that term means, because Hegel's work is quite dense like that. I do recommend philosopher dictionaries like that. They're quite useful. Like I've also got things like the Nietzsche dictionary as well next to it, just to, again, when you're reading through these books, it's useful. There's another book which this is more just for fun than anything else, and I suppose a tangent for some other things that I've been reading. I've been getting into a small series of books to relax from all of this nonsense called A Very Short Introduction To by Oxford Press, and they've got quite a few of them on a bunch of, well, a load of topics. They've published hundreds of them, and they are very short introductions to topics. Like I got the Nietzsche one, even though I've read a load of his books already, just to sort of see like what is in them, like how do they lay them out, what do they put in, what do they leave out, to give you this short, like 100-page A5 booklet sort of introduction. And that one was very good, and I actually picked up the Hegel one as well, which I've gone through, and I've been finding that one quite interesting, because even though like you can read through books about Hegel, like Hegel and the Hermetic tradition, or you can actually read through some of his stuff, obviously you don't get a lot of biographical stuff in there, and I found that Beginner's Guide is actually a very interesting one, because it gives you not only a discussion about his work, but also a bunch of like biographical information about what inspired his writings. So it sort of covers how Hegel was heavily influenced, like why was he so concerned with this end of history and this idea of this constant revolution? Well, obviously a lot of that was tied to the fact that there was a revolution happening in Germany and France at the time. So he saw the Bastille, and he saw Napoleon, and he actually specifically called Napoleon, when he saw him riding through his city having conquered it, actually said he saw this world spirit, this great revolutionary figure. And so a lot of his teenage years and early 20s were basically spent in this constant swirl of progress and revolution. So it's perhaps not so much of a surprise that a lot of his philosophy came to this idea of revolution equal progress, and if we keep revoluting, eventually we will reach this fantastic end of history where all of these contradictions will be solved because of this constant revolution that was happening. And so it looks like, in some part, a lot of his writing was just inspired by the times and place that he was in, which would also then go on to indicate, like what we spoke about earlier, talking about these the racial spirit, the Volksgeist and whatnot.
Yeah.
Well, if he was constantly inspired by this constant revolution, this constant influx of ideas and all of these things happening to him, well, of course he'd come up with an idea like that. Like, why wouldn't he? That was basically his lived experience, as it were. So it's just interesting in that it put a bunch of like biographical stuff to a lot of his other works, which you don't get when you just read what the author actually published for the most part.
Right. All right. Allison, do you have any final words? Wow, there's a lot going on there, guys. So definitely go check out Teal Deer's channel. I put a link to the Rumble video and you can subscribe. And I would suggest that you do that. And also look at whoever else is. I know that there are people that watch us on Rumble, but I think more of you guys should be on Rumble. Allison,
I was just
ahead.
impressed by the level, the sheer amount of dreck that you're going through, Teal Deer.
You know what's funny is that his name is literally too long didn't read, but he seems to do a lot of reading.
Yeah.
So, unless the D stands for did.
It's my favorite insult that people throw at me, from the progs and the leftoids. They're like, Teal Deer, that's his name, and he doesn't read anything. And it's just like, okay, first of all, you've been making this joke for years. Like, first of all, the name is obviously not too long didn't read. It's Teal Deer because it's a pun. It's funny.
Yeah, it is.
Because I find it funny. I still find it funny even after all these years. Most people end up hating their screen names after years. I still find the Teal Deer one to be funny because I think it is. Because I have the mind of a child somewhere. But they just keep making this joke, and it's like, but I literally have hours of me reading peer-reviewed stuff and books and reviews of these things. So you can't even make that joke with any degree of honesty, and it just kind of reveals an underlying malice that they have to people, which I find to be quite fun. It's also why when it comes to dealing, I suppose a little off topic, when it comes to dealing with progs and the far left and the like, if you use a lot of like self-deprecating humor, in a lot of cases, they will just go full mask off and just be like, oh, well, at least he admits it. If you're like, well, I'm reading all of these things because it's going to take me a while because, I'm kind of dumb and I don't really get these things. And they're just like, oh, at least he knows that he's stupid. And it's just like, it just unveils what awful people you're dealing with for the most part, because they can't even just, they can't into human mode. Which reminds me of the funniest thing I've ever read. It's another thing that is indelible to my hippocampus. When I pointed out to someone that I do occasionally make jokes, and they literally all caps said, serious writing or jokes, Teal Deer, you can't do both. Like the capital letters, you can't do both. It's like, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that at the age of 18, you were given a form with 2 checkboxes on them. One of them was just be a scholar or be a clown. It's like, these are your 2 career paths for your entire life. You must pick one now. My son, you are a man now. Pick your future. Big brain or stupid clown. What a bizarre world these people inhabit, but it's funny, and those are the people, I suppose, dragging it back around to some of what we've mentioned earlier. Those are the sorts of people you can't reach with material like this, because they don't actually know very much about any of these topics. They don't want to know. They just want to think that you're wrong and inferior and that they're better than you, and there's no point trying to reach those people. The only way that they will ever come around is if basically they think that they had the idea themselves, but they're not even open to the possibility of it. Like, they're the closed-minded people who are just like, anything outside their canon or their worldview is just to be shunned and not to be looked at, which again points to the fact that they're dealing with faith and not facts.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I've also been sort of reading this Diverting Hate annual report in the background. That's why I sound a little distracted. It's pretty crazy. And I think it is in some ways the ultimate institutional manifestation of all of this, because when you look through it, it's a literal condemnation of the male point of view and any man's opinion about their relationships to women. And of course that strikes right at the heart of the idea that the only gnosis is female gnosis. Am I talking bullshit? I don't know.
No.
Please tell me if I am. Okay, so is that the last you wanted to say, Teal dear? I shouldn't
To
have
be
used it.
fair, I didn't intend on saying half of that. It just kind of spilled out of me.
It's all
That's
right.
okay.
I got onto a topic and was just like, "Oh, this is kind of
Yeah.
funny. Screw it. Here's a fun anecdote. Because why the hell not?
Yeah.
It's not like my throat's gonna get any better or worse."
Okay, just on the topic of their malice, I wanted to see what would happen. Like I've been going back and forth with a feminist on Twitter for years now, and I won't say her name because she doesn't deserve more attention. But a couple, like earlier in this year, I was just like, you know what? I want to prove to myself that you are entirely motivated by malice. So everything that she said to me, I returned with, I hope, some variation of "I wish you well. I hope you find all happiness." I just kept it, and it was not facetious. So I would make an effort to find whatever she was talking about and say, "Oh, I hope that you and your husband are well and you have a good day. Oh, I hope that you do something fun with your son." Every time I said that, she would respond with the most vituperative, malicious interpretation of what I was saying. It was getting to be almost hilarious. Like, just attributing this kind of malfeasance that had absolutely nothing to do with what I was actually saying. And I realized there was nothing that I could say, no positive well-wishing, no helpful commentary, nothing that would disabuse her of the notion that I was some kind of satanic force. But, not like the good satanic force, like the bad satanic force. Because now I see that they think there is a good satanic force. Whatever the bad satanic force is. It's a little confusing to me. But anyway, there's nothing that would disabuse her.
The good one.
There would be nothing that would disabuse her of the notion that I wasn't pure evil. I'm like, why should I engage with someone like that? And it's
a good question.
It's typical. Like, why should anyone have to engage with a person who regards them to be irredeemable evil for no other reason than they disagree with them? Like, are you insane? Oh, anyway, so I just found that funny. So I found your comment.
There is no point to engaging with a lot of them, unfortunately. It's kind of sad, but I mean, in some ways, if I wanted to steel man the position, could it be that she thought you were concerned trolling? Because you do get those people where they'll leave a comment on something, and it's very obvious that they disagree with you, and they'll be like, "Oh, I forgot that you said such horrible, evil, racist, sexist things. I hope that one day you'll be happy."
No,
because they're obviously doing it in like a malicious way where they're like, "Oh, I'm just better than you because I'm this enlightened monk, and you obviously have something mentally wrong with you somehow."
No, I was genuinely trying to say, something akin to, we're both human beings. We both probably enjoy pictures of cute cats and want the best for our relatives. Why don't we meet on those terms? Why don't we recognize each other as human on those terms? And I mean, it's something that I think about a lot because, no matter how nasty I think people, on the left are, there are aspects to them that are relatable and human. And I was attempting to relate to her on that level. And it was like engaging with the brick bloody wall. Like, it's like, no, you're not a human. You're some kind of devil, and not me. Like, and I wasn't saying that to her. She was engaging with me in that way, and it's like, that is not that's not a way of going forward. Is to presume that everybody who disagrees with you lacks any humanity. So anyway, but just your anecdote about your nickname sort of reminded me of that. It's just there's the complete and utter inability to recognize the humanity of anyone who doesn't believe as you do, and then thinking that that makes you a good person. Does it? I don't know. Anyway, that's what I wanted to point out there. Again, another little rant. So I will just say the things, I guess, Brian. If
Yeah,
you
let's
enjoy
wrap
this
it up.
content-
First of all, thanks, Teal Deer, for coming on and sharing with us what you have found. And I look forward to doing more of these because I think maybe this is getting a little ahead of things, but I feel like on some level, this isn't just a rational battle or a political battle, but a spiritual battle too, it would seem.
Yeah.
So anyway, so thanks, Teal Deer, for coming on and sharing.
It is a spiritual battle, unfortunately, but it's fine. I shall return to my mountain and return someday to say things.
Yes.
As an unsure prophet of doom.
I always thought your name meant that you read the long thing and then summarized it for everyone else.
Well, that is what it would normally be used for, but remember, if you hate someone, you have to have their worst possible interpretation. So the interpretation that they go with is that I'm actually illiterate. Completely.
Yeah, you illiterate, huh? Okay, so if you guys enjoy this content, please go to feedthebadger.com/justthetip to send us a tip and a message. Just inform us that we aren't screaming into the Gnostic void of Gnosticness. I'm probably being ridiculous when I say that. But anyway, so feedthebadger.com/justthetip to help out the channel and send us a comment, and we will read it on the next reasonably relevant show. Back to you, Brian.
All right. Well, if you guys like this video, please hit like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, hit the bell for notifications, leave us a comment, let us know what you guys think about what we talked about on the show. I know this is kind of a dense topic, but I think it's important. And again, check out the links in the description to check out Rachel Wilson's book. Audiobooks like $8, $9, pretty cheap. And if you have they have free credits you can use, it's probably worth it for that. And also check out Teal Deer's video on it, also linked in the description. And please, 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 please share this video because sharing is caring. Thanks, guys, so much for coming on today's episode of the Rantzerker, and we'll talk to you all in the next video.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.